My brother demanded a DNA test at our father's will reading to prove I was not entitled to a single penny of the family fortune. When the lawyer finally revealed the results 2 days later, my brother refused to look at me. Instead, he turned to my stepmother, his face completely pale, asking a single simple question about his own paternity. In that moment, 30 years of her disgusting deception shattered into a million pieces. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to deal with a toxic family member who severely underestimated your intelligence. My name is Gwendolyn. I'm 33 years old, and I work as a forensic accountant right here in Chicago. My entire career is built on tracking hidden money, exposing corporate fraud, and dismantling financial criminals with cold, hard data. So, when my half-brother Preston tried to steal my inheritance and erase me from the family tree, he had absolutely no idea he was picking a fight with someone who makes a living by discrediting liars. The heavy oak doors of Harrison Cole's law office had barely clicked shut when a thick manila envelope slammed into my chest, scattering papers across the polished mahogany conference table. I did not flinch. I just looked up to see Preston standing there, his face contorted into that familiar arrogant sneer he had perfected since childhood. At 36, Preston was the newly self-appointed Chief Executive Officer of the Foster Investment Group, a title he earned through pure nepotism rather than any actual competence. Sitting next to him, dabbing at perfectly dry eyes with a silk handkerchief, was Caroline, my 58-year-old stepmother. "Sign the consent form, Gwendolyn," Preston demanded, leaning heavily on the table to intimidate me. "Everyone in our social circle knows your biological mother was nothing but a manipulative gold digger who trapped my father. He was just too soft-hearted to throw you into the foster system where you truly belonged. But he is gone now, and I will not let a single cent of the foster empire go to a leech who does not even share our blood. I want a full DNA test right now." Caroline reached out and placed a manicured hand on Preston's arm, playing her usual role of the reluctant peacemaker. "Now, Preston, please try to be gentle with her." She sighed heavily, turning her fake sympathetic gaze toward me. "It is not her fault she comes from such low-class origins. Your mother was a waitress, Gwendolyn, a woman who saw a wealthy, lonely man and dug her claws in. We always tried to make you feel welcome, even though you never quite fit in at the country club or our family galas. But Preston is right. Charity ends when the benefactor dies. We have a strict duty to protect Richard's legacy from opportunistic outsiders." I stared at the two of them, marveling at their sheer audacity. For 3 decades, I had been the family scapegoat. I was the one shipped off to strict boarding schools while Preston was paraded around as the golden heir. When I graduated at the top of my university class with a master's degree in finance, my father had nodded absently while Caroline loudly complained that accounting was a job for the help. Meanwhile, Preston had bankrupted 3 different subsidiary companies only to be bailed out and promoted each time by my father. They thought because I stayed quiet and built my own independent life away from their toxic drama, I was weak. They thought I would crumble at the first sign of a legal threat. I wondered briefly what Preston's wife, Simone, thought of this pathetic display. Simone was a brilliant corporate lawyer, a proud African-American woman who came from a genuinely powerful and respected Chicago family. I always knew she was too sharp to stay blind to Preston's incompetence forever. I did not shed a single tear. I did not raise my voice or try to defend my late mother's honor against their baseless accusations. Instead, I calmly reached down, picked up the DNA consent form from the mahogany table, and retrieved my gold fountain pen from my blazer pocket. I signed my name with a smooth, decisive stroke and slid the paper across the table right into Preston's hands. "Are you in a rush, Preston?" I asked, my voice completely flat and devoid of emotion. "Because I certainly am." Let us not drag this out. I want an expedited 48-hour test. I want the fastest premium laboratory processing available, and I want the results delivered right back to this room. Because honestly, I cannot wait to see the look on your face when that envelope is opened. Preston snatched the paper, his jaw clenching. You are bluffing. You know you are not his real daughter. You are just trying to buy time to hide whatever money you have already stolen from his accounts. Harrison Cole, the 60-year-old senior legal counsel who had managed my father's affairs for decades, cleared his throat. He sat at the head of the table, his expression completely unreadable behind his silver-framed glasses. The terms are accepted, Harrison stated in his deep, gravelly voice. The execution of Richard Foster's will is hereby suspended for 48 hours, pending the expedited DNA results. Until then, the estate remains totally frozen. I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my tailored suit. I did not look at Caroline or Preston again as I walked out of the conference room. I knew exactly what they were doing. They were trying to catch me off guard, hoping I would refuse the test out of pride or fear, which they would then use as evidence of my guilt in a massive legal battle. But they had miscalculated completely. As I stepped into the glass elevator and pressed the button for the lobby, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw a string of automated text messages flooding my screen. Access to the Foster family estate has been revoked. Your Black Premium credit card has been suspended. Corporate login credentials for the Foster server have been disabled. I stared at the bright screen as the elevator rapidly descended toward the ground floor. Preston had not even waited for the legal proceedings to finish. He was already trying to cut off my resources, hoping to leave me stranded and desperate before the DNA results even came back. He struck the first blow, believing he had outsmarted me. A slow, dangerous smile crept onto my face as I walked out of the high-rise building and into the freezing Chicago wind. I hailed a cab and pulled out my laptop right there in the back seat. He wanted to play dirty with a forensic accountant. I opened a secure encrypted terminal and bypassed the standard corporate firewall. I did not need his authorized access. I had built backdoor protocols into the software 3 years ago when my father asked me to quietly audit the firm. I began typing a sequence of commands, launching a blockchain tracing algorithm and a recursive search through Cayman Island banking registries. You want to freeze my accounts, Preston? I whispered to myself as lines of code reflected in my eyes. Let us see how you like it when I start tracing the $15 million you have been hiding in offshore shell companies. The war had just begun, and I was about to burn his perfect little world to the ground. The taxi dropped me off in front of the sprawling Foster family estate in the affluent northern suburbs. The biting Chicago wind whipped against my face, but the chill in the air was nothing compared to the sight waiting for me at the end of the long driveway. The heavy wrought iron security gates were firmly shut. Piled haphazardly on the frost-covered sidewalk were 4 cheap cardboard boxes. They were not even taped closed. Some of them had tipped over, spilling my personal belongings onto the dirty pavement. I saw my old college textbooks, a few winter coats, and a framed photograph of my biological mother lying face down in the slush. Preston and his mother had wasted 0 time. They changed the security codes and physically threw my history into the street within an hour of leaving the lawyer's office. My phone vibrated in my pocket with an incoming call. The caller identification displayed Caroline. I accepted the call and held the phone to my ear, my eyes scanning the massive stone facade of the mansion. I hope you like the new landscaping, Gwendolyn. Caroline's voice poured through the speaker, dripping with that fake, sugary Southern hospitality she always weaponized. I am simply cleaning up some old garbage before the actual master of this house takes his rightful place. I looked up. There she was, standing on the second-floor master balcony, wrapped in a thick cashmere shawl. She was holding her phone in one hand and a glass of red wine in the other, literally looking down on me. You call me garbage, Caroline? I replied, keeping my voice dangerously steady. Is that not exactly what you said when you threw my biological mother's original paintings into the industrial shredder when I was 12 years old? You have always loved destroying things that do not belong to you. I picked up the framed photograph from the wet pavement and brushed the snow off the glass. You can enjoy the mansion for now, but I sincerely hope you remember to pay the luxury property taxes under your own name this quarter, because the estate accounts are completely frozen. I heard her scoff through the receiver, a sharp sound of irritation. You have no money and nowhere to go. You are entirely locked out. Accept defeat and disappear quietly, or Preston will make sure you never work in the financial sector of this city again. Before I could formulate a response, the deep, aggressive roar of a high-performance engine echoed down the quiet suburban street. A sleek, glossy black Mercedes G-Class SUV pulled up directly in front of the pile of boxes, blocking my view of the iron gates. The tinted passenger window slowly rolled down. Sitting in the driver's seat was Simone. She looked absolutely immaculate in a tailored white crepe blazer, her natural hair styled in an elegant, sharp cut that framed her striking features. Simone was a brilliant Black African-American corporate attorney, born into a highly respected family of real estate developers who practically owned half of the commercial district in downtown Chicago. She took off her designer sunglasses, her dark eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that demanded immediate attention. "You are a top-tier forensic accountant, Gwen," Simone said, her voice commanding and crisp. "Do not stand there in the freezing cold and tell me you let those two idiots lock your credit cards without a backup plan. Leave the boxes. Get in. We need to talk." I glanced up at the balcony. Caroline had stopped drinking her wine. She was gripping the railing, staring down at the Mercedes with a look of absolute shock and poorly concealed panic. Her perfect daughter-in-law was supposed to be completely loyal to Preston. Instead, Simone was actively defying the family hierarchy right in front of her. I smiled, tossed my phone into my pocket, and opened the heavy door of the G-Class. I climbed into the heated leather seat and shut the door firmly. Simone hit the accelerator and the powerful SUV tore away from the curb, leaving Caroline standing alone on the freezing balcony. "I appreciate the ride," I said, buckling my seatbelt. "But I have to admit, I did not expect the wife of my worst enemy to be my getaway driver." Simone kept her eyes on the road, her grip tight on the steering wheel. "I am a lawyer, Gwen, not a fool. I know exactly how incompetent your brother is. Preston has been acting increasingly desperate for the past 3 months. He has been taking erratic business trips, dodging my questions about joint investments, and sweating through his designer suits every time his phone rings. But what finally crossed the line was his little stunt this morning." Simone merged onto the highway, heading back toward the city center. She took a deep breath, her jaw clenching with anger. "Preston approached my father 2 days ago. He tried to quietly request a massive influx of capital from my family's private trust. He claimed the Foster Investment Group was experiencing a temporary liquidity issue due to a delayed real estate closing. But my family did not build a multi-generational empire by handing out blind loans to arrogant men. I ran a preliminary check on his recent asset transfers. There is no delayed real estate closing. Preston is bleeding cash, and he is trying to siphon my family's legacy to cover up a massive financial hole in your father's company." I opened my laptop, which was already resting on my knees, and quickly connected it to the secure cellular hotspot I always kept active. "That explains why he is so desperate to secure 100% of the inheritance right now," I said, my fingers flying across the keyboard. "He needs the estate unlocked immediately to replace whatever he lost before the board of directors notices the deficit. Let me show you exactly how deep this hole really is." I pulled up the encrypted terminal I had initiated in the taxi earlier. Lines of green code scrolled rapidly across the black screen. I had been running a recursive tracking algorithm through the company's ledger, bypassing the superficial accounting layers and digging directly into the raw transaction data. Preston thinks he covered his tracks by using decentralized cryptocurrency exchanges and routing the funds through offshore shell companies, I explained, pointing to a cluster of highlighted numbers on the screen. But money never truly vanishes. It always leaves a digital footprint if you know how to read the pressure points. Look at the sequence of transactions from the previous fiscal quarter. Simone glanced at the screen while keeping the vehicle steady in the fast lane. She frowned, her sharp legal mind quickly processing the data I was displaying. That is not a minor liquidity issue. That is a systematic extraction of corporate funds. How much is missing? 15 million, I stated bluntly. The figure hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. 15 million was systematically withdrawn from Foster Group's main operating accounts over the course of exactly 6 months. Simone gripped the steering wheel so hard her knuckles turned gray. 15 million? He lost $15 million in 6 months. What did he do? Made a catastrophic investment in a fraudulent tech startup, I said, typing another command to decrypt the final destination of the routed funds. That is where you are wrong. Preston is arrogant and stupid, but he does not have the technical capacity to set up a laundering network this sophisticated. The shell accounts in the Cayman Islands are protected by a complex web of legal proxies, but they all funnel back to a single master trust. I hit the enter key. The screen flickered, bypassing the final layer of encryption. The name of the primary beneficiary holding the $15 million appeared in bold white letters across the center of my display. I turned the laptop slightly so Simone could see it clearly. Simone hit the brake slightly, her eyes widening in absolute shock as she read the name on the screen. The thief is not Preston, I said, feeling a cold surge of adrenaline rushing through my veins. The master account belongs to Caroline. Your husband is nothing but a convenient puppet. His own mother is the one looting the company, and she is letting him take the fall. Simone steered the heavy Mercedes down the slick concrete ramp of the underground parking garage in the heart of Chicago's financial district. My private forensic accounting firm occupied the entire 12th floor of a highly secure, unmarked building. I had designed the office to be a fortress of digital extraction. The elevator doors opened directly into my workspace, revealing a stark industrial room dominated by a massive curved desk and 6 high-resolution monitors glowing with encrypted data feeds. Simone stepped out of the elevator, her sharp gaze sweeping the room. She tossed her designer handbag onto a leather sofa and crossed her arms. You do not mess around, Gwen. This looks like the command center of an intelligence agency. When you hunt white-collar criminals who hide millions behind offshore trusts, you need processing power that can crack bank-grade firewalls, I replied, shrugging off my winter coat and taking my seat at the main terminal. Let us see exactly how Caroline managed to siphon $15 million without triggering the automated compliance alerts. Before I could even type my master password, the harsh ringing of a cell phone shattered the quiet hum of the servers. Simone pulled her phone from her blazer pocket. The screen flashed with Preston's contact photo. She let out a short, humorless laugh and tapped the speakerphone button, placing the device flat on my glass desk. "Where are you?" Preston demanded, his voice thick with a toxic, patriarchal authority that made my skin crawl. "You left the estate without telling me. The board members are arriving for an emergency briefing, and I need my wife standing next to me. Get the car turned around right now, Simone. You are embarrassing me in front of the executives." Simone leaned forward, her expression completely rigid. "Do not ever use that tone with me, Preston. I am not one of your terrified interns." Preston ignored her warning, his panic making him reckless. "I saw you pick up Gwendolyn. I am telling you as your husband to stay away from her. She is mentally unstable. She just caused a massive scene at the lawyer's office, and she is trying to tear this family apart because she is jealous. Come home immediately before she drags you into her delusional legal mess." Simone did not blink. Her voice dropped to a terrifying, icy whisper. The only delusional person here is the man who lost $15 million and thought he could secretly drain my family's trust fund to cover his tracks. You do not give me orders, Preston. You are a puppet playing business with your father's money. Do not call this number again until you have a competent defense attorney. Simone reached out and ended the call with a sharp tap of her manicured finger. She picked up her phone and looked at me. He is unraveling. We do not have much time before he realizes we know about the deficit. Find the money, Gwen. I cracked my knuckles and brought the workstation to life. The screens illuminated my face as I launched my custom penetration software. I bypassed the superficial financial reports of the Foster Investment Group and drove straight into the core operational ledgers. Corporate embezzlement is rarely a single clumsy theft, I explained, my fingers moving rapidly across the keyboard. Caroline did not just wire $15 million to herself. She layered it. She sliced the total amount into hundreds of smaller, seemingly legitimate microtransactions. I am seeing phantom consulting fees, overinflated vendor invoices, and ghost employee payrolls. She routed the cash through 5 different subsidiary companies to wash the origin of the funds before pulling it out of the domestic system. Simone stood behind my chair, watching the continuous data stream flow down the monitors. Can you track where the subsidiary accounts sent the washed money? I am running a packet sniffing protocol right now, I said, tracking the digital routing numbers through the international banking gateways. The money bounced through a network of European banks to break the jurisdictional chain, but it all funnels down to a single convergence point outside the reach of the United States regulatory agencies. I hit a sequence of keys, forcing the algorithm to aggressively map the final destination. An encrypted corporate entity popped up on my center monitor. Got it, I announced, pointing to the screen. The funds consolidated in a shell account registered in the Cayman Islands. The corporate umbrella is completely anonymous, designed to hide the true beneficiaries, but the routing sequence is undeniable. $15 million of stolen corporate capital is sitting right there. Simone leaned in closer, her eyes scanning the complex web of financial data. Open the account profile. We need the exact routing numbers and the signature authorization logs to prove Caroline is the sole beneficiary controlling that shell company. If we get that evidence, we can freeze the offshore account today and hand the entire portfolio straight to the federal authorities. I initiated a brute force decryption command, expecting the database to yield, but a bright yellow warning banner immediately blocked my progress. I frowned and typed a different override sequence. The system denied my request again, this time flashing an access error protocol across the interface. We have a major problem, I muttered, leaning back in my leather chair. The Cayman account is secured by an air-gapped cryptographic lock. What does that mean in English? Simone asked, her tone sharp with sudden frustration. It means the final layer of security cannot be hacked remotely, I explained, feeling a surge of adrenaline pulse through my chest. It requires a physical hardware token, a specialized encrypted drive, or a biometric key fob. Someone must physically plug that device into a terminal to authorize transfers or view the master ledger. Caroline is not just smart, she is professionally paranoid. We absolutely need to find that physical password to access the money and tie her to the theft. I was about to run a metadata search to identify the manufacturer of the security token when my primary monitor suddenly glitched. The screen stuttered violently. The green text of my tracking software vanished, replaced by aggressive lines of bright red code sweeping across the display like a digital wildfire. What is happening? Simone demanded, taking a quick step back from the desk. I frantically typed a defensive countermeasure, but my keyboard inputs were completely locked out. We are under attack, I shouted over the sudden frantic whirring of my server cooling fans kicking into maximum overdrive. An internal corporate hacker inside the Foster network just detected my breach. They are overriding my secure connection from the inside. The red code multiplied across all 6 monitors, simultaneously, systematically wiping the transaction logs I had just uncovered. Preston is not waiting around, I said, watching the precious evidence literally dissolve in front of my eyes. He hired someone to aggressively purge the corporate servers. They are burning the digital paper trail right now to cover Caroline's tracks. The monitors went completely black, leaving the reflection of my stunned face staring back at me in the dark office. We had discovered the exact location of the stolen millions, but Preston was actively destroying the only bridge we had to reach it. The dead monitors cast a cold reflection across the glass desk. Preston had bought himself some time by deploying a corporate hacker to wipe his digital tracks, but he had also practically signed a confession of his own guilt. As I reached for the secondary server switch to initiate a raw data recovery protocol, my personal cell phone shattered the tense silence of the office. The caller identification displayed a restricted number, but I knew exactly who was on the other end of the line. I glanced up at Simone. She crossed her arms tightly across her chest, her sharp gaze fixed on the glowing screen of my phone. I tapped the screen, activated the speakerphone function, and simultaneously hit the record button on my secondary audio capture device. A bright red waveform appeared on my tablet, ready to digitize every single word. Gwendolyn, sweetheart. Caroline's voice flowed through the high-definition speakers, dripping with a manufactured warmth that instantly made my blood run cold. She sounded exactly like she did at charity galas, playing the role of the benevolent, caring matriarch to absolute perfection. I am so glad you picked up. I know tensions were incredibly high at the lawyer's office earlier today. Preston can be so hot-headed, just like his father. But you know, I have always tried to be the calm voice of reason in this family. I leaned back in my heavy leather chair, letting the silence stretch across the room. I wanted her to fill the void with her own elaborate lies. I was just thinking about you standing out there in the freezing cold, Caroline continued, her tone adopting a sickly sweet rhythm of fake sympathy. It truly breaks my heart to see you struggling like this. You have always been such a restless soul, constantly trying to find your place in a world where you simply do not fit. I want to help you, Gwendolyn. I really do. I want to offer you a fresh start away from all this toxic legal drama. A fresh start? I repeated, my voice deliberately devoid of any emotion. How incredibly generous of you, Caroline. What exactly does this fresh start entail? I have authorized the family trust to issue a certified cashier's check in your name for exactly $200,000, she said, emphasizing the monetary amount as if she were offering me a winning lottery ticket. Consider it a comprehensive severance package, a parting gift from the Foster estate. All you have to do is contact Harrison Cole, formally withdraw your consent for the DNA test, and legally renounce any future claim to the inheritance. Take the money, pack your bags, and move to New York or Los Angeles. Start a new accounting firm. Build a new life. Just leave Chicago tonight and never look back. Simone raised a perfectly shaped eyebrow, a cold, mocking smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. 200,000 was mere pennies compared to the multi-billion-dollar corporate empire my father had built, and it was a pitiful, insulting fraction of the 15 million she had just embezzled. $200,000, I said, letting a harsh laugh escape my lips. You are trying to buy my entire birthright with the equivalent of your annual designer wardrobe budget. You must be truly terrified of what that DNA test is going to reveal tomorrow. I am trying to protect you from massive public humiliation, Caroline snapped, the sweet, motherly facade cracking just a fraction. When the medical test confirms you are not Richard's biological daughter, you will walk away with absolutely nothing. I am offering you a golden parachute. Take the money and run, Gwendolyn. It is the best deal you are ever going to get in your miserable life. You do not care about protecting me, Caroline. You only care about protecting your stolen offshore accounts, I stated, hitting her exactly where it hurt the most. I heard a sharp, sudden intake of breath on the other end of the line. The silence that followed was deafening. I know about the Cayman Islands, Caroline. I know about the shell companies. I know Preston is panicking right now because he realizes I am tracking the exact routing numbers you used to bleed my father's company dry. You are a delusional, paranoid little girl, Caroline hissed, abandoning the sweet tone entirely. Her voice turned vicious, sharp, and dripping with venom. You have always been a psychotic liar, ever since you were a child making up insane stories just to get attention. Is that right? I pushed back, leaning closer to the microphone and refusing to yield an inch. Is that what you told my father when you locked me in the basement during the Thanksgiving gala when I was 10 years old? Did you tell him I was delusional when you systematically fired every single nanny who showed me a shred of basic affection? You spent my entire childhood subjecting me to psychological warfare. You threw my biological mother's personal journals into a shredder right in front of my face and told everyone it was an accident. You spent 30 years trying to break my spirit so I would submit to you. I paused, letting my anger forge my words into weapons. You failed, Caroline. You did not break me. You forged me into the exact weapon that is going to destroy your life. I am rejecting your pathetic $200,000 bribe. I am going to let the DNA results expose your lies tomorrow morning, and then I am going to hand your financial transaction logs straight to the federal authorities. I am going to peel off your mask of high society perfection and let the whole world see the desperate, thieving fraud you truly are. Caroline let out a harsh, breathless laugh. The sound was purely unhinged. You think you can intimidate me? You think you have power just because you learned how to read a corporate spreadsheet? You are nothing but a bastard child playing dress-up in a business suit. And you think you have allies? Let me guess. You are sitting there right now with my foolish daughter-in-law. You think Simone is going to save you? Simone stepped closer to the desk. Her posture rigid, her dark eyes narrowing dangerously as Caroline continued her arrogant tirade. Preston was an absolute idiot to marry into that family. Caroline sneered, her voice dripping with a sickening blend of elitism and subtle, deeply ingrained racism. I told Richard it was a massive mistake to mix our bloodline with people like her. All the expensive law degrees and fancy imported cars in the world cannot change what she fundamentally is. She can wear all the luxury brands she wants, but she will always just be an aggressive, loud woman from the South Side, trying to claw her way into a society that merely tolerates her kind for the sake of diversity quotas. She is not one of us, and neither are you. The line went dead. The sharp, rhythmic beep of the disconnected call echoed through the silent office. I slowly reached out and stopped the recording. The high-quality audio file saved securely to my encrypted drive, preserving her hateful rant forever. I did not say a single word. I simply looked up at Simone. Simone stood perfectly still. Her striking, beautiful face was completely devoid of emotion, but her dark eyes burned with an intensity that could melt solid steel. She slowly reached up and removed her tailored white crepe blazer, draping it meticulously over the back of the leather sofa. She walked over to my desk, placed her hands flat on the glass surface, and looked directly at the dark, silent monitors. She thinks she knows how the world works, Simone said, her voice eerily calm, smooth, and utterly lethal. She thinks her inherited wealth and her exclusive country club memberships make her completely untouchable. She just made the final fatal mistake of her miserable life. Simone turned to me, a predatory, calculating smile slowly forming on her lips. I am going to destroy them. I'm going to tear down their entire empire brick by brick and leave them with absolutely nothing. Boot up your backup servers, Gwen. We have a lot of work to do. Exactly 48 hours had passed since I walked out of that mahogany-paneled conference room. Now I was sitting in the exact same leather chair, facing the exact same arrogant people. The only difference was the heavy silence hanging in the air. Preston sat across from me with his expensive smartphone propped against a crystal water pitcher. The red recording light blinked steadily. He had positioned the camera perfectly to capture my face. He wanted to document the exact second I was legally stripped of my family name and thrown out of the Foster empire forever. He was practically vibrating with excitement. A smug smile plastered across his face as he adjusted his custom-tailored suit jacket. Caroline sat next to him, looking like a grieving widow from a high-fashion magazine spread. She wore a modest black dress and held a tissue delicately in her manicured hands. She was ready to play the victim of a massive familial fraud. She had no idea that Simone and I had spent the last 2 days dismantling her offshore financial network piece by piece. Simone sat a few seats away from Preston, maintaining a cold and calculated distance. She looked absolutely flawless in a sharp charcoal pantsuit, her eyes fixed entirely on Harrison Cole. Harrison sat at the head of the long table. He placed a sealed, tamper-proof envelope perfectly in the center of the polished wood. The premium laboratory had delivered the expedited DNA results by private courier just 10 minutes ago. The seal was completely unbroken. We are here to officially review the expedited paternity results requested by Preston Foster and consented to by Gwendolyn Foster Harrison, stated his deep voice, commanding total authority in the room. These results will definitively establish biological relation to the late Richard Foster and dictate the execution parameters of his last will and testament. Just open it, Preston interrupted, leaning forward eagerly. Let us get this over with so security can escort this fraud out of my building. I want it on the official record that she has no legal right to anything with the Foster name attached to it. Harrison gave Preston a sharp look of disapproval before reaching for a silver letter opener. He sliced the heavy envelope open with a single, precise motion. He pulled out the crisp laboratory reports, adjusting his silver-framed glasses as his eyes scanned the data. The room was so quiet I could hear the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. I will read the results for Gwendolyn Foster first, Harrison announced. The laboratory has conducted a comprehensive genetic comparison against the biological samples provided by the late Richard Foster. Preston chuckled softly, picking up his phone to ensure the camera angle was focused entirely on my reaction. The probability of paternity is 99.9%. Harrison read, his voice ringing loud and clear. The laboratory confirms that Gwendolyn Foster is the biological daughter of Richard Foster. The smug smile instantly vanished from Preston's face. He dropped his phone flat onto the table with a loud clatter. The red recording light kept blinking, now capturing nothing but the ceiling. That is impossible, Preston shouted, jumping up from his leather chair. You bought them off. You paid the laboratory to forge those documents. My father always said her mother was a stray. He picked up out of pity. There is no way she has Foster blood. Read my results right now. Read them and prove that I am the only true heir in this room. Harrison Cole did not flinch at the outburst. He calmly shuffled the papers, pulling the second laboratory report to the top of the stack. He looked down at this document and, for the first time in the decades I had known him, I saw genuine shock flash across his disciplined features. He read the lines again, as if ensuring his eyes were not deceiving him. Harrison slowly looked up from the paper. He did not look at Preston. Instead, his gaze shifted directly to Caroline. "Read the damn paper," Preston demanded, his voice echoing off the glass walls. Harrison cleared his throat. The laboratory has conducted a comprehensive genetic comparison between Preston Foster and the biological samples of the late Richard Foster. The probability of paternity is 0%. The laboratory conclusively confirms that Preston Foster is not the biological son of Richard Foster. The silence that followed was absolute and suffocating. It was as if the oxygen had been completely sucked out of the room. Preston stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, his eyes darting wildly between Harrison and the piece of paper on the table. He looked like a man who had just stepped off a cliff and was waiting to hit the ground. 0%, Preston whispered, his voice cracking. He slowly turned his head to look at his mother. Mom, what is he talking about? What does this mean? Caroline let out a dramatic, high-pitched gasp. Her hand flew to her chest, clutching her pearls. She swayed heavily in her seat, her eyes rolling back as she slumped sideways against the armrest. It was a theatrical, desperate display of a woman pretending to lose consciousness to avoid answering the most damning question of her life. Simone let out a sharp, dismissive sigh. "Oh, please, Caroline," she said, her voice dripping with absolute disgust. "Save the terrible acting for the country club. Nobody here is calling an ambulance for a fake fainting spell." As if a switch had been flipped, Caroline instantly stopped slumping. Her eyes snapped open, cold, sharp, and completely lucid. The fragile, overwhelmed widow vanished entirely. In her place sat the ruthless, calculating manipulator who had spent 30 years orchestrating a massive financial illusion. She slowly sat up straight, smoothing the wrinkles from her black dress. She did not look at Preston, who was still staring at her in absolute horror. She looked directly at me. "You think you are so clever, Gwendolyn?" Caroline sneered, her voice dropping to a harsh, venomous register. "You think a simple laboratory test is going to destroy everything I have built? You think blood is the only thing that dictates power in this family?" She reached down into her vintage Birkin bag sitting by her feet. She pulled out a yellowed, meticulously preserved legal document housed in a thick, protective sleeve. She slammed it down onto the center of the mahogany table, right next to the DNA results. "My father knew exactly what he was doing," Caroline said, a wicked, triumphant smirk spreading across her face. "Richard found out the truth 30 years ago. He knew Preston was not his biological son, and yet he signed this document." Harrison Cole leaned forward, inspecting the aged paper. His face tightened. "This is a formal legal declaration of paternity." "Exactly," Caroline confirmed, her eyes flashing with victory. "He signed it in front of a judge. He legally claimed Preston as his own flesh and blood, knowing full well he was not. It is an ironclad, irrevocable acknowledgement of parentage under state law." Caroline leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms with an air of absolute superiority. "So, you can keep your 99.9% match, Gwendolyn, because even without a single drop of foster DNA, this binding legal paper still guarantees my son 50% of this entire empire, and there is absolutely nothing you can do to stop it." Preston snatched the yellow document from the table, holding it up like a physical shield against reality. The devastating shock of his 0% DNA match was instantly eclipsed by the intoxicating rush of corporate survival. He did not care that the man who had raised him was a total stranger. He only cared about the billions of dollars attached to the Foster name. "You heard my mother," Preston sneered, his confidence returning in a sickening, aggressive wave. "Blood or no blood, this legal signature makes me a 50% shareholder of the Foster Investment Group, and as a legally recognized equal partner, I am exercising my executive authority right now." He turned to Harrison Cole, slamming his hand flat on the mahogany table. "Draft the corporate notices immediately. I am calling an emergency shareholder and board of directors meeting for tomorrow evening at 8 o'clock. The only item on the agenda will be a vote of no confidence against Gwendolyn Foster. We are going to strip you of your board seat, liquidate your operational access, and kick you out of this company for good." I did not raise my voice. I did not engage in a screaming match with a desperate man clutching a piece of paper. I simply looked at the senior lawyer. "Harrison, I want a high-resolution, uncompressed digital scan of that exact document sent to my secure server before I leave this building. It is my legal right to review the evidence." "Of course," Harrison replied, his voice heavy with unseen burdens as he carefully retrieved the document. I stood up, buttoned my tailored blazer, and walked out of the room without another word. I did not need to argue with Preston. I needed to dissect him. 40 minutes later, the heavy steel doors of my forensic accounting firm locked firmly behind Simone and me. The massive monitors in my command center hummed to life as we entered. Simone poured herself a glass of sparkling water, her face a rigid mask of absolute disgust. "He actually thinks he won," Simone said, pacing the length of my office. "He just found out his entire life is a biological lie, and his first instinct is to steal your company. Caroline has truly raised a monster." "Monsters make fatal mistakes when they think they are untouchable," I replied, pulling up the digital scan Harrison had just transmitted from the law firm. The 30-year-old legal declaration of paternity appeared on my center screen. To the naked eye, it looked absolutely flawless. The legal jargon was standard. The notary seal was perfectly intact, and my father's signature sat boldly on the bottom line. "But my father was Richard Foster," I continued, my fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard. "He was a man who built a financial empire by trusting absolutely no one, especially not the manipulative woman who had trapped him. My father never signed a major corporate contract without building a trapdoor. If he knew Caroline was lying about Preston's paternity 30 years ago, he would never have handed over half his empire without a contingency plan. He hid something on this page." I activated the Advanced Forensic Imaging Suite on my workstation. I applied a series of digital spectral filters to the high-resolution scan, isolating the different chemical layers of the ink and the vintage paper. I stripped away the visible color spectrum, plunging the digital document into a simulated ultraviolet light analysis. Simone stopped pacing and stepped directly behind my chair, her eyes fixed intensely on the monitors. "What exactly are you looking for, Gwen?" "An anomaly," I stated, enhancing the contrast on the lower half of the document. My father owned a highly specialized fountain pen. He only used a proprietary ink blend for extremely sensitive corporate acquisitions. It contained a microscopic reflective compound that only becomes visible under specific spectrum analysis. I isolated the exact stroke of my father's signature. I maximized the digital zoom, magnifying the black ink until the individual paper fibers filled the entire screen. Suddenly, the image flared. Hidden deep beneath the dark curves of the signature, completely invisible to the naked eye, a string of microscopic characters glowed with a bright phosphorescent blue intensity. Simone leaned in sharply, her breath hitching. "Is that a code?" "It is a micro-stamped alphanumeric sequence," I confirmed, quickly typing the glowing characters into my tracking database. He embedded it directly into the ink of his signature. The decryption algorithm chewed through the complex sequence for less than 10 seconds before a massive hit registered on my right monitor. A highly classified banking profile populated the screen. "It is a master routing sequence," I explained, staring at the results in absolute awe of my father's paranoid genius. "This code corresponds to a private, ultra-secure safe deposit vault located at First Chicago Fidelity Bank. It is the deepest, most heavily guarded subterranean vault in the entire city. He left the real truth in that vault. Whatever is inside that box will completely invalidate the paper Preston is holding right now," Simone deduced, her brilliant legal mind connecting the pieces instantly. "We need to get into that bank tomorrow morning before the shareholder meeting begins." "There is a massive complication," I said, reading the strict security protocols attached to the vault profile. "We cannot just walk in with a standard court order or a physical brass key. This specific vault was upgraded 5 years ago. It is secured by a military-grade biometric lock. It requires a live physical fingerprint scan to open." "Then we need to figure out whose fingerprint your father registered," Simone said firmly. "Did he use his own?" I turned around in my heavy leather chair and looked directly into my sister-in-law's dark, intelligent eyes. I felt a sharp chill run down my spine as the profound weight of my father's final chess move fully materialized in front of me. "He did not use his own fingerprint," I said, my voice dropping to a low whisper. "My father knew Caroline would try to forge his biometric data if he died. He knew Preston was completely compromised. He needed an executor who was entirely outside Caroline's toxic influence. He needed someone with an impeccable legal background who could never be bought, manipulated, or intimidated." I turned the monitor so Simone could see the registered biometric authorization profile flashing on the screen. "He chose the only person in this family he actually respected," I said. "The vault can only be opened by you, Simone." Simone stared at her own name glowing on the encrypted banking ledger. The realization hit us both with staggering force. My father had handed the ultimate physical key to his corporate empire to the black daughter-in-law he secretly trusted infinitely more than his own fake son and his deceitful wife. Simone slowly straightened her posture, a fierce, predatory light igniting in her dark eyes. "Grab your coat, Gwen. We have a bank vault to open." The morning sun did little to warm the freezing concrete of the Chicago financial district as Simone parked her sleek black Mercedes directly in the restricted VIP loading zone of First Chicago Fidelity Bank. We stepped out into the biting wind, our heels clicking sharply against the pavement in perfect unison. There was no time for hesitation. The emergency shareholder meeting was scheduled for 8 o'clock tonight, and Preston was already moving pieces on the board to secure his hostile takeover. We pushed through the towering revolving glass doors and stepped into the cavernous marble-lined lobby. The bank was a fortress of old money and modern security, completely silent except for the hushed murmurs of wealthy clients and the soft hum of the climate control system. But my eyes immediately locked onto a glaring anomaly near the secure elevators leading to the subterranean vaults. Two men in cheap, poorly tailored suits stood squarely in front of the bronze elevator doors. They had transparent, coiled earpieces discreetly tucked behind their ears, and their arms were crossed defensively. "Preston is panicking," I whispered to Simone, never breaking my stride. "He hired private corporate security to lock down the perimeter. He must have realized his name is not on the vault registry, and he is trying to buy time to figure out who holds the keys." Simone did not even slow her pace. Her posture was rigidly perfect, projecting an aura of absolute, terrifying authority. "Let me handle these glorified mall cops," she said, her voice dropping to a smooth, lethal register. We marched directly up to the bronze elevator doors. The larger of the two men stepped forward, physically blocking our path and holding up a thick, calloused hand. "I am going to have to ask you ladies to step back," the security guard stated, trying to sound intimidating. "We have strict orders from the acting chief executive officer of the Foster Investment Group. The private vault levels are completely locked down pending a corporate legal review. Nobody goes down those elevators today." Simone stopped exactly 1 inch away from his outstretched hand. She slowly took off her designer sunglasses and looked the man up and down with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. "I strongly suggest you lower your hand before I have you arrested for attempted physical assault," Simone commanded, her voice slicing through the quiet lobby like a freshly sharpened blade. "You are a private contractor illegally obstructing a registered client in a federally insured banking institution. If you do not step aside in the next 3 seconds, I will make sure your security firm loses its operating license before lunch." The man faltered, intimidated by her fierce delivery, but he held his ground. "I am just doing my job, ma'am. Mr. Preston Foster gave us direct orders." Simone let out a sharp, mocking laugh that echoed off the marble walls. "I do not care if the ghost of Abraham Lincoln gave you orders. You have exactly 0 legal jurisdiction inside this building." She turned her head smoothly and locked eyes with a senior bank employee standing nervously behind the concierge desk. "Get me your branch manager right now," Simone demanded. Less than a minute later, a balding, frantic man in a highly expensive suit rushed over, dabbing his forehead with a handkerchief. "Ms. Simone," he stammered, recognizing her immediately. "Is there a problem here?" "There is a massive problem," Simone stated, using his first name to establish total dominance. "My sister-in-law and I came here to access a private biometric vault. Instead of your usual premium service, we are being physically harassed by two random thugs hired by a man who has zero legal authority over this specific account." The manager swallowed hard, looking nervously at the security guards. "Well, Preston Foster did call ahead. He said there was a dispute regarding the estate and requested a temporary freeze." Simone stepped right into the manager's personal space. Her dark eyes flashed with an intensity that made the man visibly tremble. "Listen to me very carefully, Richard. My family currently holds 9 figures in liquid assets within this specific banking institution. We have been your top-tier clients for 3 generations. The vault we are trying to access requires my live physical fingerprint to open. It is a biometric lock. That means I am the sole legally designated key holder recognized by the federal government." Simone paused, letting the immense weight of her family's wealth crush the manager's hesitation. "If you allow a man who is not on the registry to block my access based on a phone call, I will personally file a lawsuit against this bank for gross negligence and breach of fiduciary duty. Then I will advise my father to withdraw every single cent of our family trust from your institution before the market closes today. Do you really want to explain to your corporate board why you lost a 9-figure account to protect 2 incompetent security guards?" The manager turned completely pale. He immediately spun around and glared at the 2 men. "Step away from the elevators right now, or I am calling the Chicago Police Department to have you arrested for trespassing. This is private property, and you are harassing our most valued clients." The goons exchanged a defeated look. They knew they were massively outranked. They backed away slowly, retreating toward the exit doors. Simone offered the manager a brilliant, completely fake smile. "Thank you, Richard. Now, if you would be so kind as to swipe your master override card, we have some urgent family business to attend to." The manager hastily swiped his badge, and the heavy bronze doors slid open. Simone and I stepped into the elevator in silence. As we descended deep beneath the city streets, the air grew noticeably colder. We stepped out into a sterile, brightly lit subterranean corridor lined with thousands of reinforced steel boxes. We walked past the standard locks and approached the high-security biometric sector at the very back of the facility. We stopped in front of a sleek black titanium panel set into the wall. A small digital screen displayed a red lock icon above a glass fingerprint scanner. "My father always knew you were the smartest person in the room," I whispered, watching Simone step up to the panel. "He knew Caroline could easily forge a signature or steal a brass key, but she could never replicate your biometric data." Simone placed her right index finger firmly onto the illuminated glass reader. The machine hummed softly, running a rapid diagnostic scan. A second later, the digital screen flashed a bright, vibrant green. A heavy mechanical clank echoed through the quiet room as the thick titanium door popped open. I reached inside the dark metallic cavern. My fingers brushed against cold steel before finding a thick, acid-free preservation envelope. I pulled it out carefully and broke the wax seal. Inside was a single crisp document printed on heavy stock paper. I unfolded it, my eyes scanning the dense legal terminology my father had drafted decades ago. It is titled The Morality Clause," I read aloud, feeling my heart pound against my ribs as I absorbed the brilliant, ruthless legal trap my father had meticulously designed. "Read the exact stipulations, Simone," I urged, leaning over my shoulder to view the text. "In the event that Caroline Foster is found to have engaged in the embezzlement, misappropriation, or theft of any corporate assets belonging to the Foster Investment Group," I read, my voice steady and clear. Any and all previous legal declarations of paternity regarding her son, Preston Foster, are hereby rendered null, void, and retroactively invalidated. I looked up at Simone, the profound gravity of the document washing over me. If Caroline steals a single cent from the company, the legal paper Preston is using to claim his 50% share becomes absolute garbage. He loses his board seat, he loses his executive power, and he loses every dime of the inheritance instantly. Simone let out a triumphant breath. We have it. We have the exact legal mechanism we need to destroy his entire takeover attempt tonight at the shareholder meeting. Your father practically handed us the loaded weapon. I stared at the pristine document in my hands, but a cold knot of anxiety suddenly formed in the pit of my stomach. We have the mechanism, Simone, but we have a massive logistical problem. What problem? She asked, her sharp eyes locking onto mine. The clause clearly states we need definitive proof that Caroline is the one actively embezzling the funds, I explained, carefully placing the document back into the envelope. We know $15 million is missing. We know it was routed to the Cayman Islands. But the internal corporate hacker wiped my screens last night. I lost the digital paper trail before I could download the final verification logs. I looked down the long, empty vault corridor, realizing the sheer danger of the situation we were in. To trigger this morality clause and legally annihilate Preston tonight, we cannot just show up with a theory. We need the physical hardware token. We need the encrypted USB drive that Caroline uses to access that offshore account. We have to find her physical password to prove she is the thief, or this piece of paper is completely useless. We rushed out of the subterranean vault and back into the freezing Chicago air. The morality clause was safely tucked into my leather briefcase, but without the physical encryption key linking Caroline to the stolen $15 million, it was just an impressive piece of historical stationery. I needed to think exactly like my stepmother. Caroline was a creature of strict, undeniable habit. She trusted absolutely no one. She would never hide the physical access token in the Foster mansion, where Preston or the cleaning staff might stumble upon it. Simone slid behind the steering wheel of the Mercedes and looked at me. Where would a paranoid high society embezzler hide a hardware token? The Wellington Club, I said instantly, buckling my seatbelt. She spends 3 hours there every single Tuesday and Thursday without fail. She claims it is for the deep tissue massages and the executive steam room, but the Wellington is notorious for its airtight client confidentiality and its biometric VIP lockers. It is the perfect dead drop for a woman moving illicit offshore funds. Simone hit the accelerator. Then we are going to the Wellington. The Wellington Club was a fortress of exclusionary privilege located in the prestigious Gold Coast neighborhood. The exterior was unassuming gray stone, but the interior was an opulent display of generational wealth dripping in dark mahogany, imported marble, and heavy velvet drapery. Getting inside required a 6-figure initiation fee and approval from a notoriously strict membership committee. Fortunately, Simone belonged to a family that effectively owned the commercial real estate the club was built on. We marched through the heavy brass doors. The concierge, a tall man in a pristine tuxedo, immediately recognized my sister-in-law. He bowed his head slightly, completely ignoring the fact that I was not on the registered guest list. We walked straight past the velvet ropes. "Here's the place," Simone said, her voice dropping to a low, tactical whisper as we entered the grand foyer. Caroline always grabs a dirty martini at the main lounge before heading down to the spa level. I will intercept her at the bar. I'm going to make her so irrationally angry that she forgets what century she is in. You slip down the service staircase, bypass the attendant, and get into the VIP locker room. You have exactly 10 minutes before she realizes she is being stalled. I nodded, adjusting the strap of my briefcase. Keep her talking. Do not let her look at her phone. I veered left toward the grand staircase while Simone strode directly into the dimly lit jazz-filled lounge. From the landing, I glanced back just in time to see Simone slide into the leather bar stool directly next to Caroline. Caroline was wearing a pristine white silk blouse, nursing her martini, and scrolling through her phone. She looked up, her expression instantly twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated contempt as Simone signaled the bartender. "Well," Caroline sneered, her voice carrying that trademark venomous edge. "I suppose the Wellington is just letting anyone off the street walk in these days. I should speak to the membership committee about lowering their standards." Simone did not even blink. She ordered a neat bourbon before turning her dark, calculating eyes toward her mother-in-law. "The standards are perfectly fine, Caroline. They just make exceptions for women who actually possess real wealth, rather than women who merely steal it from their dead husbands." Caroline slammed her martini glass down onto the marble bar. The liquid sloshed over the rim. "How dare you speak to me like that? You are nothing but a gold-digging opportunist who manipulated my son." Simone let out a sharp, melodic laugh that sliced right through Caroline's fake aristocratic armor. "Your son is a biological fraud and a monumental financial failure. I am currently drafting the divorce papers that will leave him living in a cardboard box by the river. And the best part is he is too stupid to realize you are the one holding the match that burned his entire life to the ground." While Simone delivered her verbal execution, I slipped quietly past the spa reception desk. The VIP locker room was a sprawling, luxurious sanctuary lined with frosted glass shower doors and rows of heavy electronic lockers. The air smelled of eucalyptus and expensive essential oils. I moved quickly down the aisle, scanning the brass numbers. I knew Caroline's preferred locker was 402. She demanded the exact same locker every single visit. I found it at the end of the final row. The electronic keypad blinked with a solid red light. I knelt down and pulled a specialized diagnostic bypass tool from my briefcase. As a forensic accountant who frequently conducted physical security audits for corporate clients, I never traveled without my hardware decryptor. I connected the small black device to the data port beneath the keypad. The tool hummed quietly, running a rapid sequence of master override codes designed to bypass commercial-grade electronic locks. I watched the tiny screen cycle through the permutations. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew Simone was holding the line upstairs, but Caroline was a highly volatile target. She could storm out of the lounge at any second. A soft click echoed in the quiet room. The red light on the keypad flipped to a vibrant green. I pulled the locker door open. Inside hung a designer trench coat and a custom leather gym bag. I did not waste time carefully rummaging. I dumped the contents of the gym bag onto the plush carpet: workout clothes, expensive cosmetics, and a heavy silver hairbrush spilled out. I grabbed the empty leather bag and ran my fingers along the interior lining. The bottom felt unnaturally thick. I dug my nails into the corner seam and ripped the false bottom completely open. A small, matte black USB drive fell out and hit the floor. It featured a biometric thumbprint scanner directly on the casing. This was the physical hardware token. This was the master key to the Cayman Islands offshore account containing the stolen $15 million. I snatched the USB drive and shoved it securely into my inside pocket. A massive wave of triumph washed over me. We had the definitive proof. We had the weapon that would trigger the morality clause and strip Preston of everything. I hastily shoved the clothes back into the leather bag and stood up to close the locker door. "Hey, what are you doing in here?" I froze. A large, broad-shouldered woman in a dark security uniform stood at the end of the aisle. Her hand rested aggressively on the two-way radio clipped to her utility belt. She was staring directly at the forced locker door. "I just forgot my combination," I said smoothly, forcing my heart rate to steady as I casually reached for the locker handle to shut it. The security guard narrowed her eyes and stepped forward. "Let me see your membership card right now." I pushed the locker door closed. I did not realize the electronic bypass tool had triggered a silent internal tamper sensor. The moment the metal latch reconnected with the frame, a blinding strobe light flashed across the ceiling. 1 second later, the deafening, high-pitched shriek of the Wellington Club's emergency security alarm erupted through the entire building. The deafening shriek of the security alarm ripped through the serene atmosphere of the locker room. The broad-shouldered guard lunged forward, her heavy boots pounding against the plush carpet. She reached out to grab my arm, but I dropped my shoulder and ducked beneath her grasp. My hand clamped tightly around the stolen USB drive in my pocket as I sprinted down the narrow aisle of frosted glass doors. My heels skidded wildly on the slick marble floor of the main corridor, but pure adrenaline kept me moving forward. I burst through the swinging double doors, fully expecting to make a clean break for the lobby. Instead, 2 more men in dark suits were sprinting toward me from the opposite end of the hall. Their transparent earpieces confirmed they were club security. I was completely boxed in. Before the men could close the distance, a massive mechanical siren joined the electronic security alarm. Blinding white strobe lights began flashing aggressively across the ceiling. The automated fire suppression system roared to life with a violent hiss, unleashing a torrential downpour of freezing water over the expensive Persian rugs and antique mahogany furniture. Simone had not just created a minor distraction. She had marched right up to the main control panel and pulled the central fire alarm of the most exclusive club in Chicago. Wealthy patrons poured out of the lounges and executive steam rooms in an absolute panic. People were shouting, shoving each other, and scrambling toward the illuminated emergency exits. I instantly blended into the chaotic, soaking wet crowd of terrified socialites. The security guards who had cornered me were suddenly overwhelmed by the stampede of billionaires trying to save their designer suits from the sprinklers. I slipped right past them, keeping my head down, until I burst through the heavy steel emergency doors and out into the freezing rain and slicked alleyway. The glossy black Mercedes G-Class tore around the corner with a vicious roar, its massive tires screeching against the wet pavement. The passenger door flew open. "Get in!" Simone shouted over the blaring sirens, her hands gripping the steering wheel. I dove into the heated leather seats, slamming the heavy door shut just as the club security team spilled out into the alley. Simone hit the accelerator with ruthless precision, and we launched into the chaotic downtown traffic, leaving Caroline and her stolen secrets far behind. 15 minutes later, we arrived at Simone's luxury penthouse apartment overlooking the sprawling Chicago skyline. The space was a breathtaking masterpiece of modern architecture, but I ignored the panoramic city views completely. I dropped my heavy leather briefcase onto her massive marble kitchen island and pulled out my primary laptop. I retrieved the matte black USB drive from my coat pocket and set it down carefully on the stone surface. "This is military-grade hardware," I told Simone, booting up a highly specialized forensic decryption environment. "If I simply plug this device into a standard port, the drive will recognize the unauthorized access attempt and automatically wipe its own memory banks. I have to route the connection through a sterile virtual machine and somehow trick the biometric sensor into accepting a digital bypass." I connected a custom diagnostic adapter to my laptop and carefully plugged the USB drive into the slot. Instantly, my high-definition screen flashed an aggressive crimson red. A digital countdown clock materialized in the dead center of the display, starting at exactly 3 minutes. The bright white numbers began ticking down rapidly. "What exactly is that?" Simone asked, standing close behind my chair, her sharp eyes fixed on the dropping numbers. "It is a localized dead man's switch," I replied, my fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard with frantic, calculated precision. Caroline paid an elite black market programmer a massive amount of money to install a self-destruct sequence. If this drive does not register her specific biological thumbprint within 3 minutes, it will permanently incinerate the internal flash memory. The $15 million will become completely untraceable ghosts in the digital void. 2 minutes and 30 seconds. I launched a brute force hash collision attack, flooding the USB processor with hundreds of thousands of false biometric signatures per second. The cooling fans on my laptop whirred wildly, struggling to handle the intense, overwhelming processing load. I desperately needed to isolate the specific cryptographic key Caroline used to lock the master ledger. 1 minute and 45 seconds. The defense system brutally blocked my first 3 bypass attempts. Hostile error messages cascaded down the left side of my screen in a rapid waterfall of red text. I gritted my teeth and opened a raw command terminal. If I could not break through the front door of the security software, I had to completely dismantle the structural code of the drive itself. I typed a highly aggressive forensic extraction script, a malicious program uniquely designed to freeze the internal clock of the hardware by deliberately overwhelming its localized memory cache. 60 seconds. The red numbers continued to drop relentlessly. Simone did not say a single word, affording me the absolute, unbroken silence I needed to work. A drop of sweat gathered at my hairline. I forcefully rerouted all available processing power from my graphics card directly into the decryption protocol, pushing my machine to operate dangerously beyond its safe thermal limits. 30 seconds. The extraction script finally found a microscopic hidden vulnerability deep within the biometric firewall. I hammered the Enter key, injecting a targeted payload of code designed to artificially simulate a perfect fingerprint match. I maximized the application window, bringing the master transaction logs of the Cayman Islands Shell Company into full, glorious view. The dense spreadsheet contained thousands of complex microtransfers, matching my earlier predictions perfectly. But now, with the master encryption totally broken, the deceptive layers melted away. The true, undeniable path of the stolen corporate funds was entirely visible. Simone leaned over the cold marble island, her eyes scanning the massive columns of raw financial data. Caroline did not just leave the money sitting in an anonymous offshore holding account, Simone noted, her sharp legal mind catching the discrepancy immediately. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the outgoing transfer column. She has been actively funneling the cash right back out of the Caymans and dropping it into a secondary individualized trust fund. I applied a rapid tracking filter to the outgoing transactions, commanding my forensic software to reveal the final recipient of the missing $15 million. The powerful system processed the request for a split second before displaying a single name in bold black letters across the very top of the master ledger. The money was not transferred to another faceless corporation or a secondary holding firm. The entire stolen fortune had been wired directly to a private individual. Simone stared at the name glowing on the screen, her dark eyes widening in absolute, unadulterated shock. The confident, unshakable composure she always carried seemed to drain entirely from her face. Elias Thorne, Simone read aloud, her voice dropping to a stunned whisper. I frowned, looking closely at the unfamiliar name. Do you know who that is? Is he a corporate associate of Preston? Is he a rival investor trying to buy out our board members? Simone slowly turned her head to look at me, her expression transforming into a chilling mixture of absolute horror and profound realization. Gwen, Elias Thorne is not an investor. That is the name of your family's personal driver from 30 years ago. The name hung in the cold air of the penthouse kitchen, heavy and suffocating. Elias Thorne. Simone stared at the glowing monitor, her sharp legal mind connecting decades of hidden family history in a matter of seconds. She walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the glittering Chicago skyline, as if the city itself held the answers to this massive deception. Caroline hired him 30 years ago, Simone stated, her voice tight with absolute disbelief. He drove her to all those society luncheons and high-profile charity galas when your father was busy expanding the firm. He disappeared right around the time Preston was born. My father-in-law always claimed he fired Elias for stealing from the household budget. I turned back to my mechanical keyboard, my fingers flying across the keys with renewed intensity. If Caroline was secretly wiring $15 million to a disgraced former driver, he was not just a forgotten employee. I tapped into global financial registries, bypassing basic privacy walls to access international flight manifests and luxury hotel bookings. I needed to see exactly where Mr. Thorne was spending his stolen retirement fund. The decryption software chewed through the data, linking the offshore Cayman accounts to active, real-time spending habits. A massive stream of international credit card transactions populated my secondary screen. Elias Thorne was not living a quiet life in hiding. He was actively bleeding the stolen corporate funds at high-stakes baccarat tables. He is in Macau, I announced, highlighting a string of 7-figure wire transfers sent directly to a notorious casino resort in Asia. He dropped $3 million in the last month alone. Caroline is not just hiding money in a rainy day fund, she is desperately funding a massive gambling addiction. She is draining the Foster Investment Group to keep this man happy. Simone walked back to the Marble Island, her dark eyes narrowing as she processed the ultimate betrayal. The puzzle pieces snapped together with terrifying clarity. The DNA test from this morning showed Preston had 0% of Richard Foster's blood. Caroline had a long-standing affair with the driver. Elias Thorne is Preston's biological father, Simone deduced, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. The entire Foster bloodline, the arrogant prince who thinks he owns the entire city of Chicago, is the product of a cheap affair in the back of a company car. Caroline has been paying extortion money to her former lover for decades to keep him quiet about Preston's true parentage. The sheer audacity of the crime was staggering. Caroline had spent 30 years playing the perfect aristocratic wife while secretly raising the driver's son as the sole heir to a multi-billion-dollar empire. Now she was systematically looting the company to pay off her former lover's gambling debts across the globe. I immediately began compiling the raw data into a legally impenetrable digital dossier. I linked the Cayman Islands routing numbers, the biometric access logs from the Wellington Club, the wire transfers to the Macau casino, and the definitive DNA test results from earlier today. I encrypted the entire package with a dynamic hash, ensuring the metadata could be verified by any competent forensic auditor or federal investigator. This was not just a file, it was a digital guillotine. Just as the progress bar on my compilation reached 100%, my personal cell phone buzzed aggressively against the cold marble countertop. The screen lit up with a secure, encrypted text message from Preston. I picked up the phone. Simone leaned over my shoulder, reading the hostile text illuminated on the bright screen. You have exactly 2 hours to electronically sign over your shares and resign from the board, Preston wrote, his arrogance bleeding through every single word. Security cameras at the Wellington Club caught you forcing open a VIP locker. I know you stole confidential corporate data. If the transfer documents are not in my inbox by midnight, I am calling the Chicago Police Department and the federal authorities. You will be arrested for corporate espionage, grand larceny, and cyber terrorism. You are finished, Gwendolyn. Surrender now or go to prison. Preston actually thought he had the upper hand. He thought the threat of police intervention would terrify me into giving up my father's legacy. He was trying to use a minor trespassing charge to force a multi-billion-dollar surrender. He had no idea that threatening a forensic accountant with federal authorities was a massive tactical error. Simone let out a sharp, genuine laugh that echoed through the penthouse. He wants to involve the authorities? Please, let him call them. I will personally lay out the red carpet for the federal agents when they come to arrest his mother for international wire fraud. His threat is legally toothless, Gwen. He is panicking because he knows his mother lost her security token. We are not waiting for him to make a move, I said, setting my phone face down on the desk. He wants to play a high-stakes game of public reputation. Let us see how he handles a real corporate scandal. I opened a secure, untraceable communication portal on my laptop. I did not need to respond to Preston. I needed to destroy his leverage before the shareholder meeting even began tomorrow night. I extracted a carefully redacted portion of the dossier. I included the routing numbers from the Foster Investment Group directly to the casino in Macau, along with a blurred, time-stamped photograph of Elias Thorne cashing out millions in corporate funds. I deliberately left out Caroline and Preston's names, creating a massive, undeniable mystery of corporate embezzlement at the highest level of Chicago finance. "Who are you sending that to?" Simone asked, a fierce, predatory smile lighting up her flawless face. I selected the private email addresses of 3 highly aggressive investigative journalists at the top financial news outlets in the country. These reporters thrived on tearing down corrupt billionaires and exposing corporate fraud. I attached the encrypted file and typed a single anonymous sentence in the subject line. "A $15 million hole in the Foster empire is currently funding high-stakes gambling in Macau. The true thief will be revealed at tomorrow night's shareholder meeting. Ask the acting chief executive officer about his biological father." I hit send. The secure message vanished into the digital ether, delivering the explosive data directly into the hands of the financial press. "Preston gave me a 2-hour deadline to surrender," I said, closing my laptop with a satisfying snap. "By the time the sun comes up tomorrow, every major financial network in America will be demanding a full audit of his company. The match has been struck, Simone. Let them burn." The sun had barely begun to rise over Lake Michigan when the heavy security buzzer of my private condominium shattered the morning silence. Simone and I had relocated to my personal residence after deploying the encrypted emails to the financial journalists, needing to access my physical backup drives before the market opened. I walked over to the intercom monitor, fully expecting to see a courier or perhaps a desperate message from Preston. Instead, the high-definition camera revealed the disheveled, frantic face of my stepmother. Caroline Foster had somehow bypassed the front desk concierge. The flawless, aristocratic matriarch who had practically floated through the Wellington Club yesterday was completely gone. Her designer coat was improperly buttoned. Her hair was slightly frizzy from the freezing wind, and her eyes darted nervously around the empty hallway. She slammed her hand against my doorbell again, leaning heavily against the doorframe. I glanced at Simone, who was sitting on my modern leather sofa reviewing the final draft of her divorce petition on her tablet. Simone did not even look up from the screen. "Let her in," Simone instructed, her voice entirely devoid of sympathy. "She is here to negotiate a surrender. Let's see what kind of leverage a desperate thief thinks she still possesses." I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the heavy door open. Caroline stumbled inside, gasping for air as if she had just sprinted for miles. She slammed the door shut behind her, leaning against the solid wood, her chest heaving. For a long moment she just stared at me, her eyes wide and rimmed with red. Then the performance began. Tears immediately welled up in her eyes, spilling over her mascara and tracking down her pale cheeks. She covered her face with her hands, letting out a jagged, theatrical sob that echoed through my minimalist living room. "Gwendolyn, you have to listen to me," Caroline wept, stepping forward with her arms outstretched as if she expected me to embrace her. "You do not understand what it was like. You do not know what your father put me through." I took a slow, deliberate step back, crossing my arms over my chest. I kept my face entirely blank, offering her absolutely nothing. "I am listening, Caroline. Explain to me how draining $15 million to fund your former driver's gambling addiction in Macau is actually my father's fault." Caroline dropped her hands, her tear-stained face twisting into a mask of profound, manufactured agony. "Richard was a machine," she cried, her voice trembling with practiced fragility. "He built his financial empire by completely neglecting his own home. He never looked at me. He never spoke to me unless it was to dictate a social calendar or demand I host another miserable charity gala. I was completely isolated in that massive, freezing mansion. I was suffocating. She took another step closer, her tone dropping to a desperate, pleading whisper. Elias was the only person who actually saw me. He drove me everywhere. He listened to me when I was breaking down. I was lonely, Gwendolyn. I made a terrible human mistake 36 years ago. I was trapped in a loveless marriage and I just wanted to feel alive. When I got pregnant with Preston, I panicked. I lied to protect the family name. I lied to protect Richard's precious reputation. I stared at her, genuinely marveling at the sheer psychological gymnastics required to justify a multi-decade, multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. So, you committed paternity fraud to protect my father. And I suppose you embezzled $15 million from his operational accounts out of pure, unselfish devotion as well. The weeping widow routine instantly evaporated. Caroline realized that playing the victim was completely useless against a forensic accountant who had already mapped her entire criminal network. The tears vanished, her posture straightened, and the familiar vicious venom returned to her eyes. If you will not take the money I offered, then I am going to make sure you never earn another cent in this city, Caroline hissed, her voice transforming into a sharp, threatening blade. You think you hold all the cards because you found a few offshore routing numbers. You are incredibly naive. I have spent the last 30 years building a network of the most powerful corporate executives in Chicago. Half the board members on the Foster Investment Group owe me their careers. I know the regulators. I know the licensing committees. She stepped directly into my personal space, pointing a manicured finger at my face. If you do not delete that data and walk away right now, I will personally destroy your entire professional life. I will plant fabricated financial discrepancies in your previous audits. I will have my associates testify that you accept bribes from rival firms. I will ensure your forensic accounting license is permanently revoked by the state board. You will be blacklisted, Gwendolyn. I will ruin your reputation so thoroughly that you will be facing federal prison time for corporate sabotage. I will bury you. I did not flinch. I did not blink. I slowly turned away from her threatening finger, walked casually over to my kitchen island, and picked up a crystal pitcher. I poured a glass of ice water, listening to the cubes clink against the glass. I picked up the glass, walked back over to Caroline, and slid it smoothly across the granite counter toward her. Are you quite done talking? I asked, my voice dropping to a freezing, analytical calm. Because you might want to hydrate before the federal authorities arrive. Caroline frowned, looking from the glass of water back to my face. What are you talking about? I reached out and pointed a single finger toward the top shelf of my modern bookcase, situated directly behind where Caroline was standing. Nestled discreetly between two heavy financial textbooks was a sleek black motion-activated security lens. It was completely silent, but a tiny solid blue light indicated it was fully operational. Because my hidden high-definition camera just recorded your entire extortion confession, I stated, locking my eyes onto hers. You just threatened to fabricate evidence, commit perjury, and leverage corporate bribery to silence a whistleblower. That is an entirely separate list of felony charges to add to your international wire fraud. Caroline whipped her head around, spotting the lens hidden on the shelf. A look of pure animalistic panic washed over her face. She let out a furious, unhinged shriek and lunged across the room, her hands reaching out aggressively to smash the camera to pieces. She knocked a decorative vase off the counter, sending it crashing to the hardwood floor, determined to destroy the physical evidence of her own hubris. Smile for the cloud, Caroline. A commanding, authoritative voice echoed from the hallway. The door to my master bedroom swung open smoothly. Simone stepped out into the living room, looking absolutely flawless in a sharp burgundy suit. She was holding her smartphone high in the air, The camera lens pointed directly at Caroline's panicked, aggressive lunge. Caroline froze in her tracks, her hand suspended in the air, staring at my sister-in-law in absolute shock. Simone did not lower the device. Her dark eyes flashed with a terrifying, victorious brilliance. "You can smash Gwen's camera if you want to add destruction of property to your growing list of felonies," Simone declared, her voice ringing with undeniable legal authority. "But it will not do you any good. I am currently live streaming this entire pathetic meltdown directly to my private encrypted legal servers. The data is already duplicated across 3 different secure jurisdictions. Your confession is permanent, Caroline, and your entire empire is officially over." Caroline fled my apartment, her high society mask permanently shattered. The heavy wooden door clicked shut behind her, but the real explosion was happening downtown. The anonymous email I sent to the financial journalists detonated exactly as planned. By noon, every major financial news network was running aggressive, non-stop coverage on the blind item. The ticker symbol for the Foster Investment Group flashed a violently bright red across the television screen in my living room. Institutional investors despise sudden uncertainty, and a rumored $15 million deficit linked to high-stakes overseas gambling was the ultimate corporate red flag. The stock price was actively hemorrhaging value in real time, dropping by 15% before the afternoon trading session even concluded. My secure phone continuously illuminated with frantic updates from my remaining internal contacts at the corporate headquarters. Preston was orchestrating an absolute massacre on the executive floor. Terrified of the leak and desperate to project authority, he had barricaded himself inside the corner office. He was systematically terminating any vice president, senior director, or compliance officer who had ever dared to question his leadership. He was violently severing the corporate structure to consolidate his remaining power before the emergency shareholder meeting. But he did not stop at mass firings. My sources confirmed he had retained the most ruthless corporate defense firm in the city. He was bringing in a team of highly aggressive, heavy-hitting litigators who specialized in crushing whistleblowers and manipulating complex shareholder votes. He intended to walk into that hotel ballroom tomorrow night and steamroll any opposition using pure legal intimidation. Simone sat cross-legged on my living room floor, surrounded by towering stacks of printed legal documents and empty espresso cups. She had stripped off her tailored blazer, her focus entirely consumed by the glowing screen of her tablet. We were pulling a brutal all-nighter to prepare for the ultimate corporate execution. "I need an absolute, impenetrable financial barricade," Simone declared, her fingers flying across the digital keyboard with terrifying speed. "Preston is backed into a corner. When the market panic fully sets in tomorrow, he will attempt to leverage my family trust as collateral to calm the institutional investors. He will try to pledge our generational wealth to plug his $15 million hole. I am filing a catastrophic emergency injunction right now." Simone compiled the heavy legal petition with ruthless precision. "This is not just a standard divorce filing. This is a total financial severance. I'm filing an ex parte motion with the state Supreme Court seeking to immediately freeze all joint accounts, offshore holdings, and real estate assets tied to our marriage. By the time he steps up to the podium tomorrow night, he'll be legally unable to even purchase a cup of coffee in my name." While Simone was fortifying our family's empire, I was meticulously crafting our digital guillotine. I gathered the raw transaction logs from the Cayman Islands, the biometric bypass data from the private club, and the international flight manifests linking Elias Thorne to Macau. I compiled all of this into a streamlined, high-impact visual presentation. My intention wasn't for the board of directors to wade through dense spreadsheets. I wanted them staring at undeniable, overwhelming proof of corporate theft. I synchronized the entire data package to a secure remote server, linked to a discrete wireless trigger I kept in my jacket pocket. If Preston attempted to cut the microphone or halt my presentation, the files would automatically broadcast to every shareholder's smartphone in the room. The digital clock on my wall flipped to 4 a.m. Chicago lay cloaked in darkness, battered by a biting wind, yet the tension within my apartment was palpable, electric. We were utterly exhausted, running on pure adrenaline and the certainty of impending justice. Simone hit the final submission key on her tablet, dispatching the emergency injunction directly to the presiding judge's private digital inbox. It was done. The financial trap was fully armed. My secure cell phone suddenly shattered the silence. Its encrypted ringtone echoed sharply against the hardwood floors, startling us both. I glanced at the screen. Harrison Cole. The senior legal counsel never called at this hour unless a significant shift had occurred in the corporate hierarchy. I answered, immediately activating the speakerphone so Simone could hear. Harrison, tell me the board is ready to execute the morality clause, I said. Gwendolyn, we have a massive internal breach, Harrison stated, his deep voice heavy with genuine exhaustion and grim urgency. I've been actively monitoring the proxy voting registrations for tonight's emergency assembly. Preston didn't just hire aggressive lawyers today. He weaponized the remaining liquid capital in his personal accounts. Simone sat bolt upright, her eyes fixed on the phone. What exactly did he do, Harrison? He bought the boardroom. Harrison revealed the devastating reality, chilling the room. Preston spent the last 12 hours aggressively bribing 3 of the most influential swing voters on the executive committee. He offered them massively inflated stock options and guaranteed executive board seats in exchange for their absolute loyalty tonight. They've just filed their proxy voting alignments favoring his leadership. I stared at the glowing phone, processing the immense tactical obstacle that had materialized out of thin air. The math no longer works in our favor. Gwendolyn, Harrison warned, his tone grim and absolute. Even with your shares and the morality clause documentation, Preston has successfully stacked the deck. We are walking into a fully rigged election. We are completely outnumbered in votes. I sat in the darkened audio-visual control room, suspended high above the main ballroom floor, observing the entire spectacle unfold through a wall of high-definition security monitors. Simone stood directly behind my chair, arms crossed firmly over her chest. Her dark eyes narrowed as she watched her husband dig his own grave on the live feed. We had completely bypassed the hotel's security network an hour prior, locking down the control booth from the inside. We possessed unparalleled access to every camera, microphone, and digital display in the room. We were invisible, watching the predators celebrate their manufactured victory. The grand ballroom of the Millennium Reserve Hotel was a colossal monument to excessive Chicago wealth. Gigantic crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceilings, casting a cold, brilliant light upon the 200 shareholders, corporate executives, and board members gathered for the emergency assembly. The air below was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and the palpable electric tension of a corporate crisis. Private security personnel lined the perimeter of the room, standing at strict attention. Preston had spared absolutely no expense in projecting an aura of total financial stability, wanting the room to feel like an impenetrable fortress he completely commanded. In the front row of the audience, swathed in a perfectly tailored emerald green designer dress, sat Caroline. Watching her on the monitor, I had to admire her sheer sociopathic dedication to the performance. She had flawlessly masked the panicked, desperate woman who had lunged at my security camera just hours before. Now, she played the role of the steadfast, deeply wounded matriarch to absolute perfection. She offered brave, measured smiles to passing executives, subtly dabbing the corners of her eyes with a silk handkerchief, as if the stress of the family drama was almost too heavy to bear. She was actively securing her social capital, ensuring everyone in the room viewed her as the collateral victim of a deeply troubled stepdaughter. The seat reserved for Gwendolyn Foster remained conspicuously empty. It sat directly in the center of the primary shareholder row, clearly marked with an embossed silver nameplate. Preston stepped up to the clear acrylic podium, adjusting the microphone with practiced, arrogant ease. He looked impeccable. His bespoke charcoal suit fit his frame flawlessly, and his hair was styled with aggressive, expensive precision. He surveyed the crowded ballroom, his eyes deliberately lingering on my empty chair. A cruel, victorious smirk flashed across his face before he smoothly rearranged his features into an expression of grave executive concern. He honestly believed he had won. He believed the overwhelming sheer force of his 3 bribed board members and the heavy threat of federal prosecution had terrified me into packing my bags and fleeing the city. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, esteemed shareholders, and trusted partners, Preston began, his voice echoing authoritatively through the high-definition surround sound system. We are gathered here tonight under highly distressing circumstances. As many of you have undoubtedly seen in the financial press this morning, the Foster Investment Group is currently facing an unprecedented internal crisis. A malicious, coordinated leak to the media has exposed a significant liquidity deficit within our operational accounts. He paused, gripping the thick edges of the podium, projecting the image of a strong leader burdened by unfortunate truths. I stand before you tonight, not to hide behind corporate jargon, but to deliver absolute transparency, Preston declared, his tone dripping with manufactured sincerity. The deficit is entirely real. Exactly $15 million has been unlawfully extracted from our primary holding accounts. However, this was not the result of poor market investments or global economic downturns. It was an act of deliberate, malicious corporate sabotage committed by a rogue actor from within our own family. A heavy, shocked murmur rippled through the sea of executives. On the monitor, I watched Caroline bow her head, pressing her fingertips to her temples as if the emotional pain of this revelation was staggering. For years, Preston continued, his voice rising with practiced, theatrical indignation, my late father tried to integrate my half-sister Gwendolyn into this prestigious family. We gave her the finest education, we provided her with limitless financial opportunities, and we welcomed her to the executive table. But her deep-seated psychological instability and her profound resentment have finally culminated in a massive, unprovoked attack on this company. Utilizing her specialized background in forensic accounting, Gwendolyn systematically bypassed our security protocols, drained $15 million into offshore accounts, and then leaked a fabricated narrative to the press today to cover her own tracks. The 3 board members, previously bribed by Preston, nodded in solemn agreement. Masks of severe corporate concern were cemented on their faces as they played their heavily compensated roles to perfection, skillfully manipulating the sentiment of the entire room. Preston gestured broadly and dramatically toward my empty seat. And where is she tonight? Where is the so-called whistleblower? She is not here to defend her actions or present her supposed evidence. She has fled. She realized that our elite legal defense team and our internal auditors have already uncovered her digital footprints. She knows that federal indictments are absolutely imminent, and she has abandoned this company just like she abandoned her basic duty to this family. He leaned closer to the microphone, his voice descending into a harsh, commanding register that reverberated off the marble walls. I will not allow a disgruntled, jealous outsider to destroy my father's legacy. I have already authorized our legal department to pursue maximum criminal charges and freeze her personal assets for immediate recovery. But right now, we must protect the structural integrity of this board. I am officially calling for a unanimous vote of no confidence. I demand the immediate, permanent expulsion of Gwendolyn Foster from this corporation, the complete liquidation of her shares, and the absolute termination of her executive access. Preston stood impossibly tall, absorbing the room's stunned silence. He had successfully twisted the narrative, weaponized the media leak, and completely isolated me as a fugitive thief. Caroline looked up at her son, her eyes gleaming with dark, triumphant pride. The trap had been flawlessly sprung. The bribed executives reached for their voting terminals, poised to execute the final corporate slaughter. Harrison Cole sat at the far end of the executive table, hands folded neatly before him, his face utterly devoid of expression. He knew precisely what was about to transpire. "We will now initiate the binding shareholder vote," Preston announced, a victorious, self-satisfied grin finally breaking through his serious facade. He raised his hand to signal the parliamentary official. I met Simone's gaze. She gave me a single, sharp nod. I hit the master override key on the control console. Below, the entire massive ballroom plunged into absolute pitch-black darkness. The gigantic crystal chandeliers died instantly. The decorative wall sconces clicked off in rapid unison. The microphone at the podium emitted a sharp, ear-piercing screech of electronic feedback before cutting out completely. Loud shouts of confusion and sudden alarm erupted from the sea of wealthy shareholders as the five-star hotel ballroom was swallowed by the sudden, suffocating void. "Security!" Preston yelled blindly into the dark, his voice cracking with sudden, unexpected panic. "Get the backup generators online right now. Fix the lights." Nobody moved. The heavy, automated doors of the ballroom remained firmly locked shut, secured by the digital barricade I had just activated. A single second later, the massive digital projection screen, spanning the entire wall behind the podium, violently hummed to life. The sudden, intense burst of light illuminated the terrified faces of the executives seated in the front rows. The system had not rebooted to the standard corporate logo. The entire audiovisual network of the Millennium Reserve Hotel had been ruthlessly hijacked from my external, untraceable server. Preston whipped around to look at the screen, raising his arm to shield his eyes from the blinding, sudden glare. A single line of text appeared on the massive display. The letters glowed in a bright, aggressive, blood-red font that dwarfed everything else in the room. The irrefutable, unchangeable forensic data burned directly into the retinas of every single investor, board member, and executive present. $15 million Thorn. The aggressive red text glowing on the massive projection screen acted like a digital bomb dropped directly into the center of the grand ballroom. $15 million cash flow, recipient, Elias Thorn. The sheer size of the letters illuminated the horrified faces of the executives seated in the front rows. A chaotic, deafening wave of overlapping voices erupted from the sea of shareholders. The carefully constructed illusion of corporate stability that Preston had purchased shattered instantly. Men in expensive suits scrambled out of their chairs, pointing at the screen and shouting demands for an immediate explanation. Preston slammed his hands against the clear acrylic podium, his knuckles turning entirely white. He yelled blindly into the dead microphone, his face flushing a violent, panicked crimson. "Turn that screen off right now!" Preston roared, his voice cracking under the intense strain. "Security, breach the control room and cut the main power lines. This is a cyber attack. I demand order in this room." Nobody listened to him. The corporate elite do not take orders from a man whose financial ledger is actively bleeding on a 50-foot display. Before the private security contractors could even take a single step toward the audiovisual booth, a sound like a physical gunshot echoed through the cavernous space. The massive, heavy mahogany double doors at the very back of the ballroom were violently thrown open. The heavy brass handles crashed against the marble walls with a deafening impact that instantly silenced the entire panicked crowd. The emergency overhead lighting flared to life, casting a bright, unforgiving glare down the center aisle. I stood framed in the massive doorway, completely unharmed, wearing a sharp, tailored midnight blue suit. I had not fled the city. I had not surrendered my shares. I had been waiting for the exact perfect second to execute my counteroffensive. Walking perfectly in step on my right side was Simone, radiating absolute terrifying legal authority. On my left stood Harrison Cole, the senior legal counsel, who had quietly slipped out of the room moments before the lights cut out. And flanking all three of us were two tall, imposing men in tactical dark suits. They wore rigid, unsmiling expressions and had gold federal badges clearly clipped to their leather belts. They were senior investigators from the Financial Crimes Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The synchronized sound of our footsteps echoed sharply against the marble floor as we began our march down the center aisle. The crowd of wealthy investors practically parted like the Red Sea, scrambling out of our way. Preston gripped the edges of the podium so hard the acrylic groaned. He looked like a cornered animal staring down the barrel of a loaded weapon. "Stop them!" Preston screamed, spittle flying from his lips as he pointed a shaking finger directly at me. "I gave you a direct order. She is a terminated employee and a corporate spy. Get her out of my building right now. Throw them all out into the street." The private security personnel positioned along the perimeter of the room hesitated for a fraction of a second, but their lucrative contracts dictated obedience. 4 large men in dark uniforms stepped aggressively into the center aisle, physically moving to block our path to the stage. They reached out, preparing to forcibly grab my shoulders and drag me backward. They never even came close. Simone smoothly stepped in front of me, positioning herself directly between my body and the advancing security team. Without raising her voice, without flinching, she reached into her tailored blazer and produced her official Illinois State Bar Association credentials. She held the heavy leather wallet up, its gold seal catching the bright overhead lights. "I strongly advise you to carefully consider your next physical movement," Simone stated, her voice dropping to a smooth, freezing register that commanded absolute, unquestionable obedience. The woman standing behind me is Gwendolyn Foster. She is a legally recognized, registered majority shareholder of this corporation. I am her executive legal counsel. If any of you lay a single unauthorized finger on my client, I will not just file a standard assault charge. I will personally litigate you, your supervising manager, and the entire private security firm you represent into absolute, irrecoverable bankruptcy. You will spend the rest of your natural lives paying off the civil damages. Step back immediately." The lead security guard glanced at Simone's credentials, then at the 2 federal agents standing silently behind us, their hands resting near their tactical belts. The guard swallowed hard, visibly calculating the catastrophic legal risk. He lowered his hands and quickly stepped aside. The other 3 men immediately followed his lead, completely clearing the path. Simone shot Preston a cold, victorious smile and gestured for me to continue. I walked the rest of the way down the aisle without a single person daring to breathe in my direction. I reached the front of the room and locked eyes with Caroline. She was seated rigidly in the VIP row, her hands gripping her expensive silk clutch. The aristocratic mask of the grieving widow had completely melted away, replaced by the stark, undeniable terror of a trapped criminal. I walked up the short flight of carpeted stairs and stepped onto the main stage. Preston stumbled backward, his chest heaving as he tried to put physical distance between us. He looked pathetic, a fake king stripped of his purchased crown. I didn't even look at him. I simply reached out and took the microphone directly from his trembling hand. I tapped the side of the microphone. The sound system, which I had remotely unlocked a second ago, boomed loudly through the ballroom. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice echoing with pure analytical calm. "I apologize for missing the beginning of this assembly. The acting chief executive officer recently informed you that I had fled the city to avoid federal indictments. As you can clearly see, I did not run from the authorities. I simply went to go pick them up." A collective gasp swept through the audience as the two FBI agents stepped forward, taking strategic positions at the base of the stage. Preston has spent the last 24 hours desperately trying to convince you that I am a rogue hacker who drained $15 million from your operational accounts. I continued, my eyes scanning the crowd. He claims I fabricated this entire narrative to destroy his flawless leadership. But as a forensic accountant, I do not deal in fabricated narratives. I deal in hard, verifiable data. And I believe in letting the primary source speak for itself. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small wireless remote control. I held it up for the entire room to see. You do not have to take my word for it, I stated, looking down directly into Caroline's wide, panicked eyes. You can listen to the mastermind explain her own brilliant financial strategy. I pressed the activation button. The high-definition surround sound system crackled sharply. Instantly, the crystal-clear audio recording from my living room flooded the massive ballroom. Caroline's own voice, dripping with vicious, undeniable venom, blasted through the speakers for every single investor and board member to hear. You think you hold all the cards because you found a few offshore routing numbers? Caroline's recorded voice sneered, the audio quality perfectly capturing her unhinged arrogance. I have spent the last 30 years building a network of the most powerful corporate executives in Chicago. Half the board members on the Foster Investment Group owe me their careers. I know the regulators. I know the licensing committees. If you do not delete that data and walk away right now, I will personally destroy your entire professional life. I will plant fabricated financial discrepancies in your previous audits. I will ensure your forensic accounting license is permanently revoked. The recording continued playing the exact moment she confessed to the psychological warfare she had waged against me since childhood, proving her total sociopathic manipulation. The three board members Preston had bribed earlier physically shrank in their seats, terrified that her recorded boasting about owning executives applied directly to them. Down in the VIP row, the blood drained entirely from Caroline's face. Her flawless complexion turned a sickly, translucent white. She sat absolutely paralyzed, her mouth opening and closing silently as her own recorded voice continued to echo off the walls, systematically destroying 30 years of carefully constructed high society perfection in a matter of seconds. The final syllable of Caroline's recorded voice faded into the cavernous expanse of the grand ballroom. For 5 agonizing seconds, nobody moved. The sheer magnitude of the extortion and the blatant admission of her psychological warfare hung over the audience like a thick, suffocating fog. The 3 corrupted board members sitting in the front row visibly shrank into their expensive chairs, desperately trying to distance themselves from the radioactive fallout. Caroline herself remained completely paralyzed in the VIP section, her hands gripping her silk clutch so tightly her knuckles were stark white. But Preston Foster was not ready to surrender his stolen kingdom. A violent, desperate surge of adrenaline visibly washed over his face. He aggressively shoved his way past me at the podium. He reached inside the breast pocket of his bespoke charcoal suit and ripped out a thick, protective plastic sleeve. He held it high above his head, wildly waving the yellowed 30-year-old document for the entire assembly to see. "You think a tape recording changes anything?" Preston screamed, his voice raw and echoing with unhinged panic. "You think my mother's personal financial mistakes invalidate my legal standing in this corporation? I am the chief executive officer. My father signed this legal declaration of paternity in front of a state judge. He legally claimed me as his absolute equal heir. It is an ironclad, irrevocable acknowledgement of parentage." He slammed his hand against the clear acrylic podium, pointing a shaking finger directly at the board of directors. "I own 50% of the Foster Investment Group," Preston roared, spit flying from his lips. I do not care what my mother did with the operational budget. Her actions do not legally compromise my shares. I demand the parliamentary official initiate the vote of no confidence against Gwendolyn right now. I am still the majority authority in this room. The desperation was palpable. But before the parliamentary official could even react, the heavy, measured footsteps of Harrison Cole echoed across the wooden stage. The senior legal counsel walked with the absolute, terrifying calmness of an executioner who had already sharpened his blade. He stepped directly up to the podium, completely ignoring Preston's frantic shouting. Harrison unlatched his heavy leather briefcase and retrieved a thick stack of high-resolution financial reports. He handed the stack to the federal agent standing at the base of the stage, who immediately began distributing the undeniable forensic evidence to every single member of the executive board. "Look at the documents in front of you," Harrison commanded, his deep, gravelly voice slicing through Preston's hysteria. "What you are holding is the complete, unredacted transaction ledger extracted directly from an offshore shell account in the Cayman Islands. It details the systematic fraudulent extraction of $15 million from this company. The biometric authorization logs attached to those transfers belong exclusively to Caroline Foster. The recipient of those stolen funds is a man named Elias Thorne, who is currently liquidating your corporate capital at high-stakes baccarat tables in Macau." The board members frantically flipped through the crisp pages. The undeniable proof of the massive financial crime was right in their hands. The routing numbers, the timestamps, the indisputable evidence of Caroline's guilt were perfectly laid out. "That has nothing to do with my shares," Preston shouted again, his voice cracking violently. "My father gave me half of this empire." "He gave you a conditional illusion," Harrison corrected his tone, dropping to a freezing, absolute zero. "And he left the trigger to destroy that illusion with me." Harrison reached back into his leather briefcase. He pulled out the pristine, acid-free preservation envelope that Simone had unlocked from the subterranean biometric vault just hours ago. He carefully broke the wax seal. He retrieved the heavy stock paper, unfolding the secret legal mechanism that Richard Foster had kept hidden for 3 decades. Preston stopped shouting. His eyes locked onto the document, a sudden terrifying realization dawning on his face. Richard Foster was a brilliant, incredibly cautious man, Harrison stated, holding the document up to the bright overhead lights. "He discovered the truth about your biological parentage 30 years ago. Preston, he knew Caroline had engaged in an affair with the family driver, Elias Thorne. But Richard also knew that exposing the scandal publicly at that time would severely damage the corporate stock value. So, he played along. He signed your legal declaration of paternity to maintain the high society illusion." Harrison stepped closer to the microphone, his eyes sweeping across the captivated audience. "However, Richard never trusted a thief," Harrison continued. "He drafted a highly classified, legally binding contingency plan. It was secured in a vault that could only be accessed by the one person in this family he deemed completely incorruptible. He gave the biometric key to his daughter-in-law, Simone." Preston whipped his head around to look at his wife. Simone stood perfectly still at the edge of the stage, her chin held high, projecting an aura of absolute terrifying power. Harrison looked down at the heavy stock paper. "This document contains a legally executed morality clause attached directly to the foundational bylaws of the Foster Family Trust," Harrison read aloud, his voice resonating with finality. "It explicitly states that in the event Caroline Foster is found to have engaged in the embezzlement, misappropriation, or theft of any corporate assets belonging to the Foster Investment Group, any and all previous legal declarations of paternity regarding her son, Preston Foster, are hereby rendered null, void, and retroactively invalidated." The collective gasp from the shareholders was deafening. The entire corporate dynamic shifted in a single, devastating heartbeat. Preston staggered backward as if he had been physically struck in the chest. He looked at the yellowed paper in his own hand, the document he thought guaranteed his fortune, suddenly realizing it was a ticking time bomb his father had planted 30 years ago. I stepped forward, taking my place right next to Harrison. I looked directly into Preston's wide, horrified eyes. "The trap was set before you even knew how to walk, Preston," I said, my voice echoing clearly through the massive ballroom. "My father knew your mother would eventually let her greed consume her. He knew she would steal, and he ensured her theft would be the exact mechanism that destroyed your entire fake legacy." I leaned into the microphone, delivering the final crushing calculation. "With Caroline embezzling $15 million, that legal declaration of paternity you are holding officially becomes a worthless piece of scrap paper. You are no longer a recognized heir. You are no longer the chief executive officer." I looked him up and down with absolute freezing contempt. "Your shares in this company, Preston, are currently at exactly 0%. The gravity of 0% crashed down upon Preston with the physical force of a collapsing building. The arrogant, untouchable chief executive officer who had strutted onto the stage just minutes ago completely vanished. In his place stood a broken, hyperventilating fraud, clutching a useless piece of vintage paper. The massive ballroom erupted into a chaotic symphony of harsh whispers, disgusted gasps, and outright mocking laughter from the hundreds of corporate executives. The 3 board members he had bribed were practically sinking beneath their designated table, desperately trying to shield their faces from the glaring overhead lights. They realized with horrifying clarity that they had sold their loyalties to a man who possessed absolutely nothing. Preston looked frantically around the opulent room, his eyes darting wildly like a trapped animal searching for a non-existent exit. He looked at me, his gaze entirely devoid of his usual malice, replaced only by naked terror. He looked at Harrison Cole, finding no sympathy in the senior lawyer's stoic expression. Finally, his desperate, manic gaze landed on the edge of the stage. He saw his wife. Simone stood there with the poise of an absolute queen. Her sharp charcoal pantsuit contrasted brilliantly with the pathetic, unraveling chaos of the man she had married. Preston did not think about his dignity. He did not think about the hundreds of high society investors and powerful media representatives watching his every single move. He lunged toward the edge of the stage, his expensive leather shoes slipping awkwardly on the polished hardwood. He dropped heavily to both knees right in front of Simone. The loud, pathetic thud of his kneecaps hitting the floor echoed through the nearby microphones, broadcasting his complete submission to the entire assembly. "Simone, please," Preston begged, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, desperate whine. "You have to save me. You have to fix this right now. My mother ruined everything, but we can still salvage the company. Your family has the capital. Your father's trust fund has enough liquid cash to buy out the entire executive board tonight. Please, Simone, just write the check. Buy the voting shares back from the market. We can take the company private. Just sign the authorization and save me. I will do whatever you want." Simone did not immediately respond. She looked down at the man kneeling at her feet. Her dark eyes filled with an arctic, terrifying emptiness. She let the heavy silence stretch intentionally, forcing Preston to endure the agonizing, prolonged humiliation of begging in front of the entire Chicago financial elite. The entire ballroom held its collective breath, completely mesmerized by the brutal domestic execution happening on the main stage. "You want me to save you?" Simone asked, her voice dropping to a smooth, lethal volume that carried perfectly across the silent room. "You want me to leverage my family's multi-generational empire to bail out a man who spent the last 6 months secretly trying to siphon my personal trust fund to cover up his mother's criminal gambling debts? You actually believe I would hand over my legacy to a biological fraud who cannot even read a basic corporate ledger without holding his mother's hand to guide him?" Preston opened his mouth, stammering to formulate a pathetic excuse, but Simone did not give him a single second to breathe. She smoothly unclasped her pristine designer leather briefcase. She reached inside and pulled out a thick, heavy stack of legal documents bound by a shining silver clip. She did not politely hand the papers to him. With a sharp, deliberate flick of her wrist, Simone threw the entire stack directly into Preston's face. The heavy pages slapped violently against his cheek and scattered across the stage floor right out from in front of his knees. The word divorce was printed in bold, undeniable black letters across the top page, visible to everyone in the front rows. Simone declared, her voice ringing out with absolute, devastating legal authority. I filed that catastrophic emergency injunction at exactly 4 o'clock this morning directly with the state Supreme Court. Every single joint bank account, every shared real estate asset, every luxury vehicle, and every offshore holding attached to our marriage is officially frozen. You cannot touch a single cent of my family's money. You cannot even buy a cup of coffee using my last name. Preston stared down at the scattered papers, his hands shaking so violently he could barely comprehend the text. Furthermore, my legal team has officially filed a massive civil lawsuit against you for marital fraud and attempted financial manipulation, Simone continued, stepping closer so her shadow fell entirely over his kneeling form. You married me to secure a permanent safety net for your own glaring incompetence. You thought my family's wealth would be your personal bailout fund when your mother's embezzlement scheme finally collapsed. But I am the one who is cutting the net. You are leaving me with nothing. Preston gasped, tears of pure, unadulterated terror finally spilling down his face. You are stripping me bare. I am leaving you exactly as I found you, Simone corrected, her tone completely devoid of any mercy or hesitation. A worthless, arrogant parasite relying on stolen money to pretend you belong in this city. You are legally, financially, and permanently severed from my life, Preston. I sincerely hope you enjoy living on the streets because my lawyers will make absolutely sure you never see the inside of a boardroom or a luxury penthouse ever again. Have a wonderful life in the gutter. Simone turned on her heel, her posture flawlessly straight, and walked back to my side without looking at him again. The crowd of shareholders watched in absolute awe, terrified and completely mesmerized by the brutal surgical precision of her execution. Preston remained on his knees, surrounded by his divorce papers, a weeping, pathetic shell of a man crying under the bright stage lights. I did not waste another second looking at him. My eyes shifted past the stage, scanning the VIP row. It was time to deal with the true mastermind. Caroline was still sitting rigidly in her velvet chair, completely isolated as the executives around her physically backed away in disgust. She tried to stand up, perhaps to make a desperate run for the service exit. But the heavy, synchronized footsteps of the two federal agents echoed loudly across the marble floor. The investigators from the Financial Crimes Division did not hesitate. They moved with absolute tactical precision, descending the center aisle and stepping directly into the VIP section. The trap had fully snapped shut, and the federal net was finally closing in around her neck. The sea of wealthy executives and high society investors actively scrambled out of their way, pulling their chairs back to avoid any association with the disgraced matriarch. The crowd parted entirely, leaving Caroline stranded on an isolated island of her own fraudulent making. The lead federal agent reached her velvet chair and pulled out a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. The distinct metallic clink resonated sharply through the silent, massive ballroom. Caroline Foster, you are under arrest for international wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit financial extortion, the agent stated, his voice echoing with absolute, uncompromising federal authority. You have the right to remain silent. That single sentence acted as a psychological trigger. The pristine, untouchable, aristocratic facade that Caroline had meticulously maintained for 3 decades shattered completely. She snapped. She jerked her arms away from the federal agent with sudden, violent aggression. Her manicured nails clawed wildly at the air as she frantically tried to push the imposing investigator away. "Get your hands off me!" Caroline shrieked, her voice morphing into a shrill, unrecognizable pitch that made the nearby board members flinch in horror. "I am a Foster. I built this entire empire. I host the most exclusive charity galas in this city. You cannot do this to me. I know the mayor. I know the governor. I will have your badge for this." The federal agent did not even blink at her frantic, delusional threats. He grabbed her wrist with practiced, unyielding force, smoothly twisting her arm behind her back and locking the cold steel cuff securely into place. The physical reality of the metal binding her wrists triggered a complete and total breakdown. Caroline realized her immense wealth, her powerful political connections, and her lifetime of sociopathic manipulation could not save her from federal prison. She desperately needed a scapegoat. She whipped her head around, her wild, mascara-stained eyes locking onto Preston, who was still kneeling pathetically on the stage, surrounded by his scattered divorce papers. "You absolute, pathetic failure!" Caroline screamed at her own son, her voice dripping with pure, unadulterated venom. "I sacrificed my entire life to put you on that stage. I lied for 30 years. I committed multiple felonies. I stole millions of dollars just to maintain your fragile illusion of power, and you threw it all away because you are too profoundly stupid to outsmart a simple accountant. You had everything handed to you on a silver platter, and you failed. You are just as useless, weak, and pathetic as your real father." The brutal public rejection from his own mother acted like a violent electric shock to Preston's system. The weeping, broken man vanished, replaced instantly by a feral, cornered animal. Preston scrambled to his feet, his face contorted into a mask of pure, vicious rage. He pointed a shaking finger directly at the woman being forcibly restrained by the federal agents. "You ruined my life!" Preston roared back, his voice echoing fiercely through the cavernous ballroom. "You dragged me into your disgusting, pathetic gambling scheme. You used me as a human shield to cover up your cheap affair with a chauffeur. I am facing federal indictments because of your endless greed, you manipulative witch. But I am not going down for your crimes. I am going to testify against you. I am going to tell the federal prosecutors every single illegal thing you have ever done just to get a plea deal. I will make sure you rot in a federal cell for the rest of your miserable life." I stood perfectly still at the edge of the stage, my arms crossed firmly over my chest, watching the spectacular, devastating finale of their tragic play. I did not feel a single ounce of pity or remorse. For 30 years, Caroline and Preston had cultivated an image of absolute high society perfection. They had looked down on the rest of the world from their luxury penthouses and exclusive country clubs. They had called me garbage. They had called me an unwanted outsider. They had tried to erase my existence. But here they were, standing in front of the entire Chicago financial elite, viciously tearing each other apart like the absolute lowest class of street criminals. They were a pack of desperate animals turning on their own blood the exact second the trap snapped shut. Their gilded, flawless empire was nothing but a fragile house of cards built on a foundation of lies, and the undeniable force of the truth had brought the entire structure crashing down onto their heads. The federal agents practically dragged Caroline through the heavy mahogany doors. Her deranged screaming and desperate curses echoed down the hotel corridor until they finally faded into absolute nothingness. Taking a cue from Simone's earlier display of merciless authority, 2 massive hotel security guards aggressively flanked Preston. They grabbed him by the arms and escorted the sobbing, ruined fraud out through a discreet service exit. The grand ballroom was finally permanently purged of the toxic infection that had been slowly killing my father's company for decades. A profound, heavy silence blanketed the room. The hundreds of shareholders, corporate executives, and board members stared at the empty center aisle, collectively processing the historical corporate slaughter they had just witnessed. I slowly uncrossed my arms and turned to face the massive assembly, ready to address the catastrophic fallout. Before I could utter a single word into the microphone, an older, highly respected institutional investor sitting in the second row slowly stood up. He looked directly at me, a profound expression of absolute respect and awe washing over his weathered face. He raised his hands and began to clap. The sharp sound of his clapping broke the mesmerizing spell. A second executive rose, then a third. In under 10 seconds, the entire ballroom was on its feet. The sound escalated into a thunderous, deafening ovation. The applause vibrated through the massive crystal chandeliers suspended above. They weren't merely applauding the removal of a criminal element, they were celebrating a precise, flawless, and undeniably brilliant act of corporate justice. Harrison Cole returned to the clear acrylic podium, raising a hand to quiet the excited, cheering crowd. "The position of Chief Executive Officer is now officially vacant," Harrison announced, his deep voice carrying an unmistakable tone of pride and finality. Furthermore, the morality clause mandates that the voting rights tied to the contested shares automatically and permanently revert to the sole legitimate biological heir. Therefore, as senior legal counsel, I call for an immediate, binding board vote to officially appoint Gwendolyn Foster as the new chairwoman and chief executive officer of the Foster Investment Group. The three compromised board members, desperate to salvage their careers and prove allegiance to the new leadership, were the first to raise their hands. A surge of raised hands immediately followed, rippling aggressively across the packed room. I surveyed the sea of investors and smiled. The vote was completely and unequivocally unanimous. Exactly 7 days had elapsed since the pivotal shareholder assembly that systematically purged the Foster Investment Group of its corporate rot. As the newly appointed chairwoman and CEO, my inaugural week was an intense, high-stakes marathon. Restructuring executive boards, conducting thorough forensic audits, and actively cooperating with federal prosecutors concerning Caroline's extensive international embezzlement network. I had frozen assets, dismissed complicit managers, and fully stabilized the market value of my father's legacy. But today, my schedule contained one final, deeply personal executive action. I was reclaiming my family's estate permanently. The sleek silver corporate SUV navigated the slick, winding roads of the affluent northern suburbs. The harsh Chicago winter had descended with full force, blanketing the sprawling million-dollar estates in a thick, unforgiving layer of freezing snow. I sat in the heated leather back seat, flanked by a specialized team of 4 elite private security contractors. These were not the hired thugs Preston had previously deployed at the bank to intimidate me. These individuals were highly disciplined corporate professionals, equipped with official court-ordered eviction notices and a strict, uncompromising directive to remove all unauthorized personnel from company-owned property. The imposing wrought iron security gates, which Caroline had arrogantly locked against me just a week prior, swung open smoothly. I had completely overridden the biometric security grid the moment my executive authority was legally ratified. The heavy vehicle glided up the long, frost-covered driveway and parked directly before the massive stone columns of the main entrance. I stepped out into the biting, freezing wind, my tailored dark wool trench coat shielding me from the aggressive cold, and walked directly through the heavy oak double doors. The grand foyer of the Foster mansion was an absolute disaster. The pristine, aristocratic elegance Caroline had meticulously maintained for decades was utterly obliterated. Expensive crystal vases lay shattered, antique Persian rugs were stained with spilled wine, and empty luxury liquor bottles littered the polished marble floor. The house reeked of stale alcohol and profound defeat. seated precisely in the center of the devastated room, surrounded by a pathetic, disorganized cluster of hastily packed cardboard boxes, was Preston. The former golden boy of the Foster empire was unrecognizable. He wore a wrinkled, stained cashmere sweater and baggy sweatpants. He hadn't shaved in days, and his eyes were intensely bloodshot and sunken from severe alcohol consumption and absolute sleep deprivation. He resembled a hollow, terrified specter haunting a castle he no longer possessed. Simone's devastating financial injunction had proven surgically effective. Preston's personal bank accounts were permanently frozen by the state Supreme Court. His premium credit cards were consistently declined, and his fleet of luxury vehicles had already been repossessed by aggressive dealerships. Because his name was legally severed from the Foster Trust due to the morality clause, he had no safety net. He was utterly destitute. Preston looked up as the heavy, synchronized footsteps of my security team echoed sharply through the ruined foyer. The raw, naked panic that flashed across his pale face was genuinely pathetic. "Gwendolyn," Preston rasped, his voice hoarse and broken as he scrambled awkwardly to his feet. He held his hands up defensively, stepping backward until he bumped into a stack of boxes. "You can't do this right now. You can't just throw me out onto the street. I have absolutely nothing left. My mother's assets are seized by the federal government. Simone filed a restraining order and locked me out of the marital accounts. I don't even have enough cash to rent a cheap motel room." I stood perfectly still, my hands resting calmly in my coat pockets. I surveyed the ruined foyer, my expression entirely devoid of any sympathy or hesitation. "The property deed to this estate is officially registered under the Foster corporate umbrella," I stated, my voice carrying a cold, analytical precision that left no room for negotiation. "You are no longer an executive, a shareholder, or a recognized member of this family. You are legally classified as a hostile squatter, trespassing on private corporate real estate. You have exactly 10 minutes to vacate the premises before my security team physically removes you from the building." The harsh reality of his absolute destruction finally shattered whatever fragile remnants of pride he still possessed. Preston's legs gave out completely. He dropped heavily to his knees on the cold marble floor, landing directly before my leather boots. The arrogant, untouchable man who had smugly demanded a DNA test to erase my existence was now openly weeping, begging for his financial life. "Please, Gwen, I am begging you," Preston sobbed, his hands gripping the edges of a flimsy cardboard box so tightly his knuckles turned white. "I'll do anything you want. I know I was wrong. I know my mother manipulated me and used me. Just give me a chance to survive. Hire me at the firm. I don't need an executive title. I don't need a corner office. I'll work in the mailroom. I'll sweep the floors in the basement archives. I'll be a basic data entry clerk. Just give me a minimum wage salary so I don't freeze and starve on the streets. Please, you have to help me." I looked down at the weeping, broken fraud kneeling at my feet. I felt not a single ounce of triumph or pity. I only felt the deeply satisfying mathematical balance of the universe finally correcting a 30-year deficit. I leaned forward slightly, my eyes locking onto his terrified, tear-filled gaze. "The Foster Investment Group does not employ financial fraudsters," I replied, my words slicing through the freezing air of the foyer like a freshly sharpened blade. "You made your choices when you actively tried to steal my father's legacy and laughed in my face while doing it. You thought you could manipulate the system and discard me like garbage. Now you get to live with the permanent, devastating consequences of your own profound stupidity." I straightened my posture and gestured sharply to the elite security team standing silently behind me. "Pack up the rest of your trash, Preston," I commanded, stepping back toward the main entrance to create space for the guards. "Pack it up right now, just as your mother threw my belongings out onto this very street 7 days ago. The cycle is now complete." Two large security contractors immediately advanced, firmly grasping Preston by his arms and hauling him to his feet. They afforded him no time to protest or resist. A small cardboard box was thrust into his chest, and they marched him forcefully out the front doors. I stood in the warm, heated foyer and watched him stumble awkwardly down the icy stone steps. The brutal Chicago snowstorm was intensifying rapidly, aggressively whipping freezing white flakes against his thin, stained cashmere sweater. Preston turned back, his face pale and contorted in absolute freezing despair. He opened his mouth, raising his free hand to beg me for mercy one last time. I heeded none of his words. I reached out and grasped the heavy brass handles of the massive oak double doors. With a single, swift, decisive motion, I slammed the doors shut. The heavy mechanical deadbolt engaged with a loud, resounding metallic click, permanently sealing the fraudulent presence outside in the freezing, unforgiving cold. 6 months later, Chicago's violent winter storms had finally receded, replaced by the crisp, golden light of early spring. I sat behind the expansive custom-built mahogany desk in the corner executive suite on the top floor of the Foster Investment Group headquarters. The floor-to-ceiling glass windows offered an unobstructed panoramic view of the entire city skyline. I leaned back in the heavy leather chairman's chair, resting my hands on the polished armrests. This office once served as a monument to my father's secrets and Preston's undeserved arrogance. Now, it was a perfectly synchronized command center. The air carried the scent of expensive espresso and absolute, undeniable victory. I had spent the past 2 quarters methodically dismantling the inefficient, bloated corporate structures Preston had implemented. I replaced his sycophantic executives with brilliant, data-driven analysts. The market responded to my aggressive restructuring with overwhelming enthusiasm. Our stock price had not merely recovered from the initial shock of the scandal, it had surged to an unprecedented historic high. The corporate ledger was finally perfectly balanced. The federal justice system had processed the criminals with a ruthless efficiency that I deeply admired. Carolyn Foster did not receive the luxurious white-collar slap on the wrist she had desperately anticipated. When her high society friends grasped the sheer magnitude of her international wire fraud, every single one of her powerful political connections immediately abandoned her. Her expensive defense attorneys could not counter the flawless, encrypted digital dossier Simone and I had personally delivered to the federal prosecutors. The judge remained entirely unmoved by her theatrical weeping in the courtroom. Carolyn was officially sentenced to a mandatory 10 years in a high-security federal penitentiary. The woman who had spent 30 years orchestrating gala events and designer evening gowns was now assigned to the prison laundry facility, wearing a standard-issue coarse cotton uniform. She was completely stripped of her wealth, her status, and her stolen aristocratic identity. She would spend the next decade confined to a concrete cell, utterly forgotten by the city she once believed she ruled. Preston suffered a fate arguably worse than federal prison. He was forced to remain in the real world, burdened by the crushing weight of his own profound incompetence. Simone's divorce attorneys had systematically dismantled his financial life, leaving him with mountains of catastrophic legal debts and zero access to any marital assets. Because his name was permanently disgraced within the financial sector, no corporate entity in the country would even grant him an interview for a basic mailroom position. The former chief executive officer was eventually compelled to accept a minimum wage job simply to avoid starving on the streets. He was currently employed as a late-shift janitor at a massive, unheated logistics warehouse in the desolate industrial suburbs of Illinois. He spent his nights pushing a dirty mop across freezing concrete floors, emptying trash cans and scrubbing industrial toilets. Every single cent he earned above the absolute poverty line was automatically garnished by the state to pay off his massive civil restitution orders. The arrogant Prince of Chicago had been permanently reduced to a silent, invisible ghost, sweeping the floors of a forgotten warehouse. The heavy oak doors of my executive suite clicked open, interrupting my quiet reflection. Simone stepped into the expansive office, exuding an aura of radiant freedom and unburdened grace. She was resplendent in a tailored crimson suit that perfectly accentuated her fierce, intelligent presence. Having officially finalized her divorce last month, she had legally severed the last vestiges of her toxic connection to the fraudulent bloodline. She glided across the plush carpet, holding a chilled bottle of vintage champagne in one hand and two delicate crystal flutes in the other. "You look entirely too comfortable in that chair, Madam Chairwoman," Simone said, her brilliant, victorious smile illuminating her flawless face. She placed the crystal glasses on the edge of my pristine desk and expertly popped the cork from the champagne bottle. I returned her smile, gesturing to the sprawling Chicago skyline visible behind me. "I'm merely admiring the view. The city looks entirely different when you're not constantly watching your back for thieves brandishing fake legal documents." "I reviewed the final quarterly audit this morning, Simone," I continued. "The international accounts are stabilized. We have fully recovered the stolen capital from the Macau authorities, and the board of directors just unanimously voted to double our expansion budget for the upcoming fiscal year. The company has never been stronger." Simone poured the bubbling golden liquid into the crystal flutes. She handed one to me and picked up the other, walking around the desk to stand beside my chair. Together, we gazed out at the glittering skyscrapers, the tangible manifestation of the empire we had aggressively defended and permanently secured. Simone turned slightly, raising her crystal glass toward me. Her dark eyes flashed with deep, profound respect. "They thought they could use a single DNA test paper to drag you down into the mud," she stated, her voice smooth, steady, and filled with absolute triumph. "They genuinely believed a laboratory result would make you surrender your entire life." I looked down at the expensive, sparkling champagne in my glass. I thought of the terrified look on Preston's face when the truth finally shattered his fabricated reality. I recalled Caroline's screams as the federal agents fastened the steel handcuffs around her wrists. I had not won this war with shouting matches or emotional manipulation. I had triumphed with cold, undeniable facts and flawless preparation. Raising my glass, I met Simone's fierce gaze. I offered her a sharp, calculating smile that mirrored the ruthless efficiency of a perfectly executed audit. "They forgot that the only thing flowing in my veins is the truth," I said, my voice resonating with absolute, uncompromising finality. I took a slow, deeply satisfying sip of the champagne. And numbers never show mercy. The most profound lesson to draw from this narrative is that your worth is never defined by the toxic narratives others attempt to impose upon you. For decades, Gwen was treated as the family outcast, constantly belittled and dismissed by a stepmother and brother who believed that boisterous arrogance and manipulative falsehoods could rewrite reality. They thought they could break her spirit through emotional abuse and forged documents. However, Gwen's ultimate victory demonstrates that true power does not stem from inherited titles, false entitlement, or engaging in shouting matches with narcissists. Genuine power arises from absolute competence, financial independence, and the unwavering confidence of knowing your own identity. When confronting manipulative individuals who thrive on gaslighting and chaos, your most potent weapon is never your emotion. It is the cold, undeniable truth. Gwen reclaimed her empire not by begging for validation or resorting to her family's level of petty cruelty. She succeeded through meticulous preparation, razor-sharp intellect, and the cultivation of a secure alliance with someone who genuinely recognized her value. She illustrated that when illusions are stripped away and toxic individuals are confronted with hard data and ironclad boundaries, their fragile empires inevitably crumble under their own weight. This story serves as a powerful reminder that you are not obligated to accept the diminished role that a dysfunctional family or environment attempts to assign you. You possess the absolute right to extricate yourself from manipulation, invest in your own capabilities, and construct a fortress of independence that no one can ever breach. The truth will always endure longer than the loudest lies, and your success is the ultimate form of justice. If you have ever had to stand your ground against toxic manipulation and prove your true worth to those who underestimated you, please share your experiences in the comments below. And remember to hit that like and subscribe button for more empowering stories of resilience and justice.